Hey guys, tonight we are going to climb aboard one of the most romanticized, and frankly, misunderstood, pieces of history, a Royal Navy warship from the 18th century. Forget the sweeping orchestral scores and the heroic figures in pristine uniforms you see in the movies. We're going to a place where your sense of smell might not survive the first hour, let alone your body. We're exploring the real gritty and profoundly unhygienic world that was life at sea for the average sailor. It's a story of survival in a floating wooden box filled with hundreds of people, questionable food, and a whole lot of, well, filth. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And in the comments below, let me know what city you're listening from and what time it is for you. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The journey begins not on a grand quarterdeck with a salute, but in the damp, clinging darkness of a port city. It's late. The air is thick with the smell of coal smoke, low tide, and cheap ale spilling from the taverns that line the docks. You're huddled in the stern of a small bobbing boat called a tender, shoulder to shoulder with a dozen other men who smell faintly of sweat and anxiety. No one is speaking. The only sounds are the rhythmic splash of oars and the gruff commands of the midshipmen guiding you towards the colossal shadow looming in the harbor. This is your new home, a third-rate ship of the line. From this low angle, it doesn't look majestic, it looks like a monstrous wooden wall, a cliff face studded with the black squares of sealed gun ports. It seems impossible that something so huge, made of wood, can even float. As you draw closer, you begin to make out the intricate web of ropes and spars against the moonlit clouds, like the skeleton of some great prehistoric beast. Getting aboard is your first test. A rope ladder, slick with sea spray, is thrown down the side. You grab hold, the coarse fibers digging into your palms. The whole time you're trying not to look down at the dark, swirling water between the tender and the hull of the warship. A fall from here would be inconvenient, to say the least. Finally, you scramble over the railing and land with a clumsy thud onto the deck, and that's when it hits you, the smell. It's not one smell, but a whole symphony of them, a complex bouquet that fills your lungs and seems to coat the back of your throat. First, there's the tar. It's everywhere. The miles of rope in the rigging are saturated with it to prevent rot, and the scent is a sharp, pungent, and inescapable part of the ship's identity. Sailors were often called jackdaws for a reason. The stuff gets on your hands, your clothes, the very air you breathe. Underneath the tar is the smell of damp, seasoned oak, a smell that speaks of immense strength and constant struggle against the sea. But mingled with these almost wholesome maritime smells are others. There's the faint, sour odor of unwashed bodies, hundreds of them. There's the greasy ghost of tonight's supper, likely boiled beef, wafting up from the galley. And beneath it all, a low, constant, stomach-turning funk that you can't quite identify yet. It's the ship's bilge, the very bottom of the vessel, and you'll become intimately familiar with that particular perfume soon enough. You stand there for a moment, a ghost of a man on a deck dimly lit by a few swaying lanterns. They cast long, dancing shadows, making it hard to tell how many people are actually around you. But you can hear them. A low murmur of conversation from a group of sailors huddled by the mast, the creak and groan of the ship's timbers as it gently rocks in the tide, the steady tread of the marine on sentry duty. You are now just one of over 700 souls packed into this floating fortress, a fact that modern visitors to restored ships often find hard to grasp. They see the empty space, but you are living the reality of the crowd. A petty officer, a man with a face like a worn leather sea boot, barely glances at you. He just points a thumb towards a dark hole in the deck. Down you go. Find a spot to sling your hammock. No welcome speech, no tour. Just a gruff command. Historians and naval architects still debate the precise emotional impact of this first moment on a new sailor, especially one who wasn't a volunteer. Was it sheer terror at the scale and the chaos, or was there a strange, grudging sense of awe for this colossal, breathing machine you are now a part of? For you, right now, it's mostly just confusion and a deep, sinking feeling that you've made a terrible, terrible mistake. As you approach the companionway, the hatch leading down, the wave of smells gets stronger, warmer, and more humid. You take a final breath of the relatively fresh night air, and then you begin your descent into the belly of the beast. The air changes instantly as you descend. It's warm, heavy, and saturated with the breath of sleeping men. You've just entered the gun deck. By day, this is a place of lethal industry, the fighting heart of the ship. But by night, it transforms into a sprawling, chaotic dormitory. The ceiling is shockingly low. You have to stoop to avoid hitting your head on the massive wooden beams above. Lined up on either side of the deck are the great cannons, silent and immense, like sleeping iron beasts. They take up most of the space. The rest is a forest of humanity. Everywhere you look, hammocks are slung, packed so tightly together that they almost touch. The regulations state 14 inches of space per hammock, a laughable precision in this cramped organic mess. Inside each canvas cocoon is a man, and the collective sound they make is a low, rumbling symphony of snores, coughs, and the occasional muttered word from a dream. The dim light from a few carefully guarded lanterns casts a pale, greasy glow over the scene, making the swaying bodies look like strange fruit hanging from the beams. Your guide, the petty officer, shoves a folded piece of canvas and a thin mattress into your arms. Your hammock, your E in the fourth mess, starboard side. Don't get lost. He points vaguely into the gloom and then disappears back up the ladder, leaving you alone. You stumble forward, trying to navigate the narrow pathway between the cannons and the hammocks. A few men are still awake, sitting on sea chests, mending clothes by the poor lighter just staring into space. They watch you, the new arrival, with a mixture of indifference and mild curiosity. Their faces are a catalogue of hardship. Some are old and leathery, their skin a roadmap of sun and sea. Others are shockingly young, barely out of their teens, with a nervous energy about them. You find your designated mess a small group of about 8 men who will be your family for the foreseeable future. You will eat with them, work with them, and sleep alongside them. An older sailor with a heavily scarred eyebrow and kind eyes gives you a nod. "Just got pressed, lad?" he asks, his voice a low rumble. You nod, not trusting your own voice yet. He gestures around at the men in your mess. "Most of us. That one," he says, tipping his head towards a man with a haunted look, "was a weaver from Bristol. They took him right off the street. Him over there, a farmer. Never seen the ocean before last week." This is the reality of manning the King's Navy. A significant portion of your shipmates are not here by choice. They are the harvest of the press gangs. You've heard the stories, of course. Gangs of sailors, led by an officer, roaming the port cities with cudgels and warrants, legally empowered to force any seafaring man into service. But the definition of seafaring was notoriously flexible. In times of war, it meant any able-bodied man who couldn't produce papers proving he was exempt. They were snatched from taverns, plucked from their homes, and swept up from the streets, often waking up from a drunken stupor with the rocking of the sea as their first clue that their life had irrevocably changed. But the press gangs didn't just patrol the streets. In their desperation to fill quotas, they'd also take men from less savory places, including prisons. And this is where a quiet, invisible horror boards the ship with the new recruits. A man sitting near you coughs, a deep, rattling sound that makes your skin crawl. Your neighbor, the old sailor, notices your glance. "Gale fever," he mutters under his breath. "Brought it with him from Newgate prison." He's talking about typhus. It's a disease that thrives in filth and overcrowding, and the squalid prisons of 18th century England were its perfect breeding ground. The disease is carried by body lice, a pest that every single person on this ship will soon be intimately familiar with. A man is taken from his cell, crawling with lice, and brought onto this ship. A chia squeezed into a hammock, just inches from his neighbor. In the night, a louse, carrying the disease, simply hops from one piece of bedding to the next. In a week, another man is sick. In a month, an epidemic can sweep through the gun deck, felling men more efficiently than any French cannonball. You look at the coughing man, then at the impossibly small space separating your hammock from his, and you feel a new kind of fear, colder and more creeping than the fear of battle. Historians today still argue about the press gang system. The Admiralty at the time insisted it was a grim necessity. The only way to crew a fleet large enough to project British power across the globe and defend the homeland, they would point to naval victories as justification. But others, both then and now, argued it was a deeply flawed and brutal practice. It fostered resentment, led to high rates of desertion, and often brought in skilled, unwilling, and sick men onto ships, potentially doing more harm than good. Could better pay, prize money, and conditions have created a sustainable volunteer navy? The debate continues in academic circles. But for you, here and now, the debate is moot. These men are your reality. You finally manage to sling your hammock, a clumsy, awkward process. You try to climb in, tipping precariously before flopping into the canvas tube. It sways gently with the motion of the ship. You are suspended in the dark, surrounded by the breath, the warmth, and the unseen ailments of strangers. You are no longer an individual. You are part of a massive, crowded, and very fragile organism. And as you lie there, listening to the cacophony of sleep and sickness, you wonder which of your new companions will see this voyage through to the end. The first morning light is not something you see, but something you feel. It's the piercing, relentless shriek of the boatswain's call, a high-pitched whistle that slices through the thick air of the gun deck and seems to vibrate inside your skull. It's followed by a bellowing shout, all hands, lash and stow, lash and stow. Chaos erupts. Men groan, curse, and begin to untangle themselves from their hammocks. The routine is swift and brutally efficient. You have moments to wake, get out of your hammock, lash it tightly into a neat, sausage-like bundle, and then carry it up to the quarterdeck to be stowed in the netting S along the ship's rails. There's no time for a morning stretch, no lingering in bed. The space you slept in is needed for the day's work. Your bed, when stowed, serves a dual purpose. It clears the deck for action and also provides a surprisingly effective barrier against enemy musket fire. Everything on this ship has at least two functions. You hastily follow the flow of men, a river of bleary-eyed sailors carrying their bedding. As you emerge onto the top deck, the morning air is a shock, cold, clean, and tasting of salt. The sun is just a sliver on the horizon, painting the sea in shades of gray and pale orange. But you have no time to admire it. You stuff your hammock into the designated netting and rush to your station. Your world, you quickly learn, is defined by boundaries, both physical and social. This ship, a 70-gun vessel, is roughly 170 feet long and about 47 feet wide at its broadest point. That sounds big, but when you cram over 700 men inside, along with cannons, loadstock, provisions for months, and all the equipment of war, personal space becomes a theoretical concept. Your entire existence is lived out in public, in a space that would today be considered dangerously overcrowded for a school hall, let alone a home. The ship is a city of wood, floating in a vast, blue wilderness. It has its own laws, its own rigid social structure. The geography is vertical. The top decks, the quarterdeck, and the forecastle are the domain of the officers. The waist of the ship, the open area in the middle, is the main workspace for the sailors. Below that are the gun decks, where you sleep and fight. And below that, in the deepest, darkest parts of the ship, is the orlop deck and the hold, a place of storage, surgery, and perpetual darkness that you hope to rarely visit. You spend the morning learning the ropes literally. There are miles of them, and every single one has a name and a purpose. An officer assigns you to a team of top men, the sailors responsible for the sails and rigging. It's considered a prime assignment for the young and agile. But as you look up at the dizzying height of the mainmast, a complex cat's cradle of rope and wood swaying against the sky, your stomach does a nervous flip. The air is already filling with the sounds of the ship coming to life, the rhythmic hollering of men hauling on ropes, the creak of the yards as they are trimmed to catch the morning breeze, the clatter of buckets on the deck, and the distant, mournful lowing of a cow, a passenger you hadn't expected. This is the central, unshakable fact of your new life: you are never alone. You work in teams, hauling on the same rope until your palms are raw. You eat squash together at your mess table, a simple plank of wood hooked to the side of the ship between two cannons. You relieve yourself with others just a few feet away. There is no privacy. A sneeze, a cough, a sigh, everything is a public event. This constant, enforced proximity has a profound psychological effect. On the one hand, it can forge incredible bonds of brotherhood and teamwork, essential for survival in a storm or a battle. You learn to anticipate the movements of the man next to you, to trust him with your life. But on the other hand, it can fray nerves to the breaking point. A minor annoyance, a personal habit, a disagreement over a game of cards all can fester in this pressure cooker environment, sometimes exploding into violence. Historians often debate the true nature of this social dynamic. Was the 18th century naval ship a well-oiled machine of disciplined professionals, as some contemporary accounts suggest, or was it more of a floating slum, barely held together by the threat of the lash and the promise of prize money? The truth, as is often the case, probably lies somewhere in the messy middle. It was both. It was a place of incredible skill and bravery, and also a place of squalor and desperation. One fascinating little detail of this world is the ship's crush. No, not a romantic infatuation, but the literal crush of bodies. To save space, gangways were an arrow, and staircases or companionway ladders were steep and tight. When a call like all hands on deck was made, hundreds of men from the lower decks had to funnel up through these tiny bottlenecks at once. It was a frantic, jostling, and sometimes dangerous scramble. A man could easily lose his footing and be trampled in the rush. You experience a mild version of this just trying to get from one end of the gun deck to the other. As the morning wears on, the ship settles into its routine. You are part of a vast, complex organism. Every creak of the timber, every flap of the sails, every command shouted into the wind is a sign of its life. You are a single cell in its body, a tiny cog in its intricate machinery. And as you stand on the deck, the shore shrinking behind you, you realize that this wooden world, with all its smells, sounds, and suffocating closeness, is now the only world you have. As night falls, the gun deck once again transforms from a workspace back into a bedroom. The mess tables are unhooked and stowed, and the forest of hammocks is raced along. The air, already thick from a day of labor, grows heavier still as the deck is sealed off from the cool night. The only fresh air comes from the hatchways, and even that is limited. You find your spot again, between the same two men as last night. The process of slinging your hammock is a little easier this time, a small victory in a day full of challenges. You climb in, and the gentle, rhythmic rocking of the ship that felt so alien yesterday is now starting to feel normal. It's a constant motion, a cradle-like sway that your body is already adapting to. But any comfort that might bring is immediately undermined by a new sensation. An itch. It starts on your ankle, a tiny, persistent prickle. You scratch it, then another itch on your side, and another in your hair. You sit up in your hammock and, in the dim, greasy lantern light, you see them. Tiny dark specks on the rough canvas of your bedding and on the coarse fabric of your shirt. Lice, your neighbor, the old salt sees your quiet horror and lets out a low chuckle. Welcome to the family, son. They're on the ship's books, same as us. He's not entirely joking. Body lice, or seam squirrels as the sailors wryly call them, are an unavoidable part of life at sea. They infest the bedding, the clothing, and the very timbers of the ship. With hundreds of men packed so closely together, sharing blankets, and rarely having the opportunity to wash themselves or their clothes in fresh water, it's a paradise for parasites. You can try to fight back. Sailors would spend what little downtime they had chatting, not talking, but sitting together, picking the lice in their eggs nets from the seams of their clothing. Some would even pass their shirts quickly over a candle flame, a risky process called reading the newspaper, hoping the heat would kill the pests. But it's a losing battle. For every louse you kill, 100 more are waiting. You will never be truly clean of them. They are your constant companions, a living, biting reminder of the squalor you inhabit. And it's not just the lice. As you lie in your hammock, trying to ignore the crawling sensations, you become aware of other life in the darkness. You hear a faint scratching sound from the corner, then the squeak of a rat. The ship is teeming with them. They are bold and numerous, feasting on the ship's stores and scurrying through the decks at night. They'll chew through canvas, rope, and even the leather of your shoes if you're not careful. Then there are the cockroaches, Bombay runners, the sailors call them. They are everywhere, scuttling in the shadows, emerging in droves if you spill a crumb of food. They get into the water casks, the bread bags, everything. Some sailors even developed a grim game of cockroach racing on their mess tables. It was one way to pass the time and feel some semblance of control over the infestation. Sleep doesn't come easily. The hammock itself is a challenge. It's a tube of canvas designed to cocoon you against the roll of the ship, while it prevents you from being thrown to the deck in rough seas. It also holds your body in a rigid, slightly curved position. For the first few weeks, you'll wake up with a stiff back and sore shoulders, but it's the lack of solitude that's truly unsettling. You are surrounded, the snores, the coughs, the man next to you who groans and talks in his sleep, dreaming of a home he may never see again. The air is a shared commodity, recycled through hundreds of pairs of lungs, thick with the smells of unwashed bodies, stale rum, and damp wool. If a man near you is sick, you are breathing his sickness. This brings us back to the lice and their deadly secret. As we touched on before, they are the primary vectors for epidemic typhus or gale fever. Historical accounts are filled with horrifying stories of this disease, sweeping through a fleet. A single sick man brought aboard from a press gang raid could trigger an outbreak that would incapacitate a significant portion of the crew. In 1740, Admiral George Anson set off on a voyage around the world with nearly 2,000 men. He returned 4 years later with fewer than 200. While scurvy was a major killer, typhus and other fevers took a devastating toll in the crowded, vermin-infested conditions of his ships. Historians still debate the full extent to which the Navy understood the connection between lice and typhus in the 18th century. While the formal scientific link wouldn't be established until much later, experienced naval surgeons certainly observed the correlation between new drafts of men from prisons, lice infestations, and subsequent outbreaks of fever. They knew filth and disease were linked, even if they didn't understand the specific mechanism of the louse. They advocated for better ventilation and for cleaning and fumigating the lower decks, but their recommendations were often ignored or poorly implemented in the face of the daily demands of running a warship. A strange and rather disgusting little piece of folklore from the time gives a hint of the sheer scale of the infestation. It was said that a sailor could leave his shirt on an anthill overnight, and by morning, the ants would have eaten every louse and knit from the seams, leaving the fabric clean. Whether this actually worked or was just a desperate fantasy is another question entirely. It certainly paints a vivid picture of the problem. Tonight, however, you have only your fingers and a growing sense of resignation. You pull the thin, scratchy blanket up to your chin, trying to create a barrier that you know is useless. The ship creaks and groans around you, a living entity breathing in the dark. You are inside it, a passenger in its gut, sharing your bed, your air, and your blood with a multitude of tiny, unwelcome shipmates. Sleep, when it finally comes, is shallow and fitful, punctuated by the need to scratch. The morning routine is the same, but today you notice something new. As you're scrambling to get your hammock stowed, you catch a glimpse of a different world. An officer, a lieutenant with a crisp, clean shirt and powdered hair, emerges from a small cabin near the stern. He moves with an unhurried grace that seems alien on this frantic deck. He doesn't jostle or shout, he gives a quiet order to a marine, who snaps to attention. Later, you see a boy, a young servant, carrying a tray with what looks like a porcelainy pot and a plate of actual bread, not the rock-hard biscuit you've been gnawing on. You're witnessing the Great Divide. Life on this floating wooden world is a tale of two cities. There is the world of the common sailor, lived out in the damp, crowded, and public spaces of the gundecks. And then, there is the world of the commissioned officers, a life of relative and distress, relative privacy and comfort in the stern of the ship. The captain reigns supreme from his quarters, the great cabin. It's a spacious, light-filled area right at the back of the ship, with large windows offering a panoramic view of the sea. It's often lavishly decorated, with polished wood, maps, fine furniture, and perhaps even a small library. The captain dines alone or with his senior officers, served on proper plates with silverware. He has his own bed, his own servant, and a degree of solitude unimaginable to the men on the lower decks. Below the captain, the lieutenants, the master, then the surgeon also have their own small cabins, partitioned off from the chaos. These are tiny spaces, often no bigger than a closet, but they offer a door that can be closed. This single fact, the ability to shut out the noise, the smells, and the sight of other people, is a luxury beyond measure. Their food is better, cooked separately from the crew's rations. They might have their own small stock of wine or brandy. Their uniforms are made of finer wool, and they have the means and the opportunity to keep them cleaner. This separation wasn't just about comfort, it was a fundamental part of maintaining naval discipline. The awe and respect required for the chain of command were reinforced by this physical and social distance. Officers were gentlemen, often from middle or upper-class families, who had purchased their commissions or worked their way up through the midshipman ranks. You were not. And the ship's architecture was designed to remind you of this fact every single day. You see it in the water rations. Well, you'll soon be drinking slimy, questionable water from a communal barrel. The officers have their own private, and likely better maintained, water casks. You see it in the sanitation. While you'll be making the perilous journey to the head at the front of the ship, the officers have their own private toilets, called quarter galleries. These were small chambers built onto the side of the stern, next to the captain's cabin, with a toilet seat that emptied directly into the sea. They offered privacy and convenience, a stark contrast to the public, windswept experience of the common sailor. Even in sickness, the divide is clear. An officer who falls ill can convalesce in his own cabin, attended by the surgeon in relative peace. A common sailor gets sent to the sick bay, a dark, poorly ventilated space on the orlop deck, often located near the ship's anchor cables, making it one of the loudest and most unpleasant areas on the vessel. However, it's important not to over-romanticize the officers' lives. Their cabins were still cramped, damp, and subject to the constant motion of the ship. They breathed the same foul air from the bilge, and while they were less likely to be infested with lice, no one was completely immune. In battle, a cannonball was no respecter of rank. It would tear through the captain's great cabin just as readily as it would sift through the gun deck. The captain bore the immense responsibility for the ship and everyone on it. A single mistake could mean disaster, disgrace, or death. There's a curious historical debate about the exact diet of the officers. While we know it was substantially better than the crew's, The specifics are often pieced together from personal letters and journals. Some captains maintain their own livestock for fresh meat and milk. They might have small gardens of herbs growing in window boxes. But was this the norm, or the exception for wealthy and well-connected captains? How much did a junior lieutenant's diet really differ from that of a warrant officer like the boatswain, nor the carpenter of the lines, especially among the lower-ranking officers and the senior warrant officers, could sometimes be quite blurry. These are the small, human details that historians love to investigate. A bizarre but illustrative piece of naval etiquette from the era was the toast of the day. Each day of the week had a specific, official toast that the officers would drink to after dinner. For example, Monday was our ships at sea, Tuesday was our men, and famously, Wednesday was ourselves, as no one is likely to wish us harm. This ritualized drinking reinforced their shared identity as a class apart from the men they commanded. It was a small, daily ceremony that underlined the invisible wall running through the ship. Today, you are acutely aware of that wall. You watch the lieutenant walk the deck, his leather shoes making a clean, crisp sound, while your own bare feet are crude. Worn shoes slap against the damp wood. He is clean, you are grimy. He is powdered, you are probably lousy. You both serve the same king, on the same ship, in the same patch of ocean, but you inhabit entirely different planets. And as you get back to the hard, physical labor of your day, you understand that your primary job is not just to sail the ship, but to serve the men who command it. The call of nature is an urgent, democratic force. It comes for captains and cabin boys alike, but on this ship, how you answer that call depends entirely on your rank. You've already glimpsed the officers' private quarter galleries. Now, it's time for you to learn the ropes of the common sailor's toilet. It isn't a place, it's a concept, and it's called the heads. The name comes from its location at the head or bow of the ship. You have to make your way forward, past the forecastle, onto the beakhead, a triangular platform that juts out over the water in front of the main hull. Here, there are no walls, no privacy whatsoever. There is just a series of wooden seats or gratings perched precariously over the open ocean. Sometimes it was just a rope net stretched out. This is your toilet. You sit there, exposed to the elements. On a calm, sunny day, it might be almost pleasant with a fine view of the horizon. But on a cold day, the wind whips around you, chilling you to the bone. In the rain, you are soaked. And in rough seas, it is a genuinely terrifying place to be. The bow of the ship pitches and dives dramatically, sending plumes of spray over you. You have to cling on for dear life to avoid being washed overboard. More than one sailor, unsteady from sickness or grog, met his end in this very spot. There is no toilet paper, of course. The standard method of cleaning oneself is with a piece of old, frayed rope, often called the tow drag or ewe-line, which is dangled in the sea. It is, naturally, a communal rope. You use it, then you drop it back into the water for the next person. It's a system that is both ingenious in its use of available resources and staggeringly unhygienic by modern standards. The thought of sharing a single, sea-soaked rope with hundreds of other men is enough to make your stomach turn. The design of the heads is a masterclass in unintended consequences. The prevailing winds usually blow from the stern towards the bow, which in theory should carry the smells away from the ship. This works reasonably well when the ship is sailing. However, when the ship is anchored or becalmed, the wind can shift, and when it does, it blows all the odors from the heads right back down the length of the ship, blanketing the decks in a foul miasma. This is why the area around the bow was often considered the stink-eyest part of the vessel, a place where only the toughest sailors were stationed. Furthermore, the constant washing of the sea, which was supposed to be the cleaning mechanism, didn't always work perfectly. The gratings in the woodwork of the beakhead would become permanently fouled, creating a constant source of odor that no amount of wind could fully disperse. This brings up a fascinating, if slightly stomach-churning. Little detail the head money. The man assigned the job of cleaning the heads was one of the lowest on the ship's totem pole. It was a disgusting, thankless task. To compensate him, he was allowed to keep any coins that were accidentally dropped from the pockets of sailors using the facility. It was a meager and deeply unpleasant way to supplement one's income. Historians and nautical archaeologists sometimes debate the exact construction of the heads on different classes of ships. While the general principle was the same, the specifics, were they individual seats, a long bench with holes, or just nets, could vary. Reconstructions in museum ships are often sanitized, cleaner versions of the reality. They might show neat, tidy wooden seats that give no hint of the filth and peril they actually entailed. The true nature of this daily experience is pieced together from sailors' diaries and naval records, which often mention the necessary and grimly understated terms. For you, the first visit to the heads is a lesson in humility and balance. You pick your way out onto the beakhead, the ship creaking beneath you, the vast, indifferent ocean swirling just a few feet below. You are completely exposed. Your shipmates pass by on the forecastle deck above, barely giving you a glance. This is normal. This is part of the routine. There is no shame here because there is no privacy to be ashamed of losing. You learn to be quick, to be efficient, and to hold on tight. You learn to check the wind direction before you go. And you learn to appreciate the simple, profound luxury of a private, enclosed toilet in a way you never have before. It's one of the many things you took for granted on land that has now been stripped away, reduced to its most basic, functional, and public form. The experience is a powerful equalizer. In one sense, everyone has to do it, but the method is a stark reminder of your place in this world. You are not an officer. You do not have a private gallery. You are a common sailor, and your toilet is the wind and the waves. The ship may be a fortress of filth, but that doesn't mean there's no cleaning. In fact, a significant portion of your life is about to be dedicated to a back-breaking, seemingly endless cycle of scrubbing. The Royal Navy was obsessed with the appearance of cleanliness, even if the methods sometimes made things worse. Your introduction to this world is a heavy, flat stone and a bucket of seawater. The command rings out after the morning routine: all hands to holystone the decks. You look around and see sailors breaking out large, flat pieces of sandstone, some as big as a Bible and smaller, hand-sized blocks. These are the holy stones. The large ones are called Bibles because they were often stored in a box that looked like a prayer book box, and sailors had to get down on their knees to use them, as if in prayer. The smaller ones are, predictably, called prayer books. Your task is to get down on your hands and knees with yours, in a long line, and scrub the wooden deck planks. First, the deck is wetted down with seawater. Then, a layer of sand is scattered over the planks to act as an abrasive. Then, the real work begins. You push and pull the heavy holy stone over the wood, grinding away the top layer of dirt, grease, and grime. It's grueling, monotonous work that leaves your knees raw and your back screaming in protest. The goal is to scrub the deck planks until they are bleached almost white. A captain took immense pride in the whiteness of his decks. It was a sign of a disciplined, efficient crew and a well-run ship. When a visiting officer came aboard, the state of the decks was one of the first things he would notice. It was a matter of naval pride, a key performance indicator of its day. But here's the problem. The primary cleaning agent is seawater. Seawater is full of salt. When you douse the wooden decks with seawater day after day, the wood becomes saturated with salt, and salt attracts moisture. So the very act of scrubbing the decks ensures that they are almost perpetually damp. The lower decks, in particular, rarely ever dry out completely. This constant dampness is terrible for the health of the crew. It creates a humid, chilly environment that seeps into your bedding, your clothes, and your bones. It's the perfect condition for rheumatism and other respiratory ailments to thrive. So while the deck might look clean on the surface, the process of getting it that way contributes to the unhealthy atmosphere below. You are scrubbing away the visible dirt, but creating an invisible damp misery. This leads to a fascinating and slightly absurd quirk of naval life, the obsession with dryness. After the decks were wholly stoned, they had to be dried. This was usually done with swabs, what we would call mopsin then, in a process that sailors found particularly tedious, with heavy, flat pieces of iron called hodesk will jiso by rubbing the deck with old canvas. Some accounts even mention using hots and to absorb the final traces of moisture. Getting the deck from soaking wet to bone dry was an obsession. Historians have debated the true hygienic value of holy stoning. On the one hand, it did remove a layer of surface grime which could have harbored germs. The abrasive action of the sand and stone would have been somewhat effective at scouring away filth. On the other hand, the constant dampness it created was a significant health hazard. Was the benefit of a clean-looking surface worth the cost of a permanently damp living space? It's a classic example of 18th century hygiene logic, where appearance often trumped practical health considerations. The prevailing medical theory of the time, miasma theory, held that disease was spread by bad air and foul smells. So, if the ship looked and smelled clean, at least on the top decks, it was believed to be healthier, even if the underlying conditions were not. And where did the holy stones themselves come from? A fun, little-known fact is that many of the original Bibles were literally stolen from churchyards. Sailors on shore leave would sometimes pry up pieces of sandstone monuments or gravestones to bring back to the ship. There's a certain dark irony in using a piece of a tombstone to perform a task that felt like a penance. Later, the stones were officially supplied by the dockyards, but the legend of their origin stuck. For you, the experience is pure physical toil. Your knees are scraped raw from the sand and the rough stone. The sun is beating down on your back. All around you, men are doing the same thing, their grunts and the rhythmic scraping of stone on with the only sounds. You look at the planks you've just scrubbed. They do look whiter, cleaner. There is a strange, grim satisfaction in it. But then you look ahead at the vast expanse of deck yet to be scrubbed, and you realize this is a job that will never, ever be finished. As soon as the whole ship is done, it will be time to start all over again. You are part of a ritual, a performance of cleanliness. It's a Sisyphean task designed to keep idle hands busy and to satisfy the aesthetic demands of the officers. And as you feel the dampness from the deck seeping into the knees of your trousers, you have your first inkling that on this ship, clean and healthy are not necessarily the same thing. You've endured the smells of tar, unwashed bodies, and the open-air toilets. But there is another scent, a permanent, foundational odor that underpins them all. It's a foul, complex stench that seems to rise up through the very floorboards of the ship. It's the ghost at the feast, the monster in the basement. It is the smell of the bilge. Today, you get to meet it up close. The command comes down for a party of men to work the bilge pumps. It's a job no one wants, and as a new hand, you're a prime candidate. You are led down, past the gundecks, past the dark or lop deck where the cables are stored, and into the hold, the cavernous belly of the ship. The darkness is almost total, broken only by a single, swaying lantern. The air here is thick, stagnant, and breathtakingly foul. It's a wet, rotten smell, a combination of decay, putrid water, and something acrid that burns the back of your throat. This is the bilge. The bilge is, quite simply, the lowest point inside the ship's hull. And like any lowest point, it's where everything ends up. Water is the main ingredient. No wooden ship is ever completely watertight. Seawater constantly seeps through the seams in the hull planks, trickling down and collecting in the bottom. But it's not just clean seawater down here. Into this water goes everything that spills, leaks, or is thrown down from the decks above. Spilled grog, greasy residue from the kitchens, vomit from seasick sailors, urine, blood from the slaughter of livestock, runoff from the rat-infested corners of the hold, it all finds its way down here. It sloshes around, mixing with the leaking seawater, rotting food scraps that have fallen through the gratings, and any other refuse that has accumulated over the weeks and months. This toxic slurry sits in the darkness, decomposing, festering. The result is bilge water, a black, greasy, foul-smelling liquid that is a health hazard in its own right. The gases it releases, mostly hydrogen sulfide, which smells like rotten eggs, are not just unpleasant, they can be dangerous. In a poorly ventilated ship, these foul airs could build up, causing sickness or even, in extreme cases, asphyxiation. The miasma theory of disease was wrong about the mechanism, but it was right about one thing: places that smelled this bad were often places where people got sick. Your job is at the pumps. These are simple, hand-operated suction pumps that run through the decks. You and a team of men grab the long wooden handles and begin a monotonous, back-and-forth rhythm. Pump, 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 pump. With each stroke, you can hear a disgusting slurping sound from deep below as the pump draws the foul water up. It's then discharged out of the side of the ship through a pipe, leaving a greasy, dark stain on the hull. The work is exhausting, but it's absolutely essential. If the bilge water is allowed to accumulate, it can have disastrous consequences. First, it can affect the ship's stability. A few hundred tons of free-sloshing water in the bottom of the hull can make the ship dangerously unstable in rough seas. Second, the putrid water can contaminate the fresh water and food supplies stored in the hold. The wooden casks that hold the ship's drinking water are not perfectly sealed. If they are sitting in a bath of bilge water, the foulness will eventually seep in, turning the drinking water into a vector for disease. A particularly disgusting tidbit from this underworld is the bilge rat. The rats that infest the ship are bad enough, but the ones that live in the bilge are a special breed. They are often described in sailors' accounts as being larger, more aggressive, and slick with the black grease of the bilge water. They are the undisputed kings of this foul domain. Cleaning the bilge, not just pumping it, was a monumental task known as sweetening the bilge. It could only be done when the ship was important the hold was empty of stores. Men would have to go down into that ghastly space with scrapers and buckets to manually remove the solidified sludge and filth that had accumulated on the timbers. Then, the whole area would be washed with vinegar or fumigated by burning pitch or brimstone to try and kill the smell. It was one of the worst jobs in the entire Navy. Historians are still fascinated by the various methods the Navy experimented with to combat the bilge problem. They tried different pump designs, different ventilation systems. Wind sails were often used to funnel fresh air down below, and various chemical treatments for the water. The problem was so central to the health and safety of the ship that it occupied a great deal of the Admiralty's time and resources. Yet, no system was ever truly effective. The bilge was a fundamental, unavoidable consequence of putting a 1,000-ton wooden structure in the ocean. As you work the pump, the smell seems to seep into your clothes, your hair, your very skin. You know that even after you go back up to the gun deck, that smell will follow you. It's the ship's signature perfume, a constant reminder of the rottenness that lies just a few feet beneath where you eat and sleep. You are living on a thin wooden shell, suspended between the vast, clean ocean and demand, made swamp of your own filth. And, with every pump, you are just barely keeping that swamp from swallowing you whole. The boatswain's call signals midday, and the welcome shout of out spirits is heard. But before the rum comes the food. You are starving. The morning's work of holy stoning or pumping the bilge has left you feeling hollow. You scramble to your mess, where the day's rations are being distributed. The smell wafting from the cook's galley is ambiguous, not exactly appetizing, but it signals sustenance. Your expectations for a hearty, warm meal are about to be brutally recalibrated. Naval catering in the 18th century was not about taste or nutrition. The challenge was to find foods that could survive months, or even years at sea without refrigeration. The answer was salt and dehydration. Lots and lots of it. The cornerstone of your diet, the thing you will eat almost every single day, is the ship's biscuit. Do not picture a fluffy buttery scone. Picture a round, thick cracker, about the size of your hand, made from nothing but flour, water, and maybe a little salt. It's baked until it's as hard as a piece of wood. This is not an exaggeration. Sailors would often have to break it up with a fist or a small hammer before they could even attempt to eat it. It's a jaw-breaking, teeth-cracking affair. You pick one up. It feels dense, heavy. You tap it on the wooden mess table. It makes a solid clack. This is hard tack. And it's your bread. The best way to eat it, you learned from the older sailors, is to break it into small pieces and soak it in your grog, soup, or whatever liquid is available until it softens into a slightly more chewable mush. But the biscuit has another feature, a source of protein that isn't on the official menu. As you break a piece open, you see little black specks in the network of tiny tunnels inside. Then a small, pale grub wriggles out. These are weevils or bread bugs. The flour used to make the biscuits was often infested with their eggs, which would happily hatch during the long warm months of a voyage. The sailors have a grimly pragmatic approach to this. The old saying goes, it's the weevils you see that are the problem, not the ones you don't. Some would tap their biscuit on the table in the dark, hoping the weevils would fall off before they took a bite. This is famously cited as the origin of the naval toast to the sailors, may they always be in the dark. Others would just accept it. As one sailor wryly put it, it's better than no meat at all. The other staple of your diet is salted meat. This is beef or pork that has been heavily cured in brine to preserve it. The result is a piece of meat so saturated with salt that it's almost inedible without extensive preparation. It comes out of the cask in stiff, grayish-brown slabs, so hard and shrunken it's nicknamed mahogany by the crew. To make it even remotely edible, the ship's cook has to soak it in fresh water for hours, sometimes a full day, to leach out the worst of the salt. Even then, it's incredibly tough and chewy. It's usually boiled for hours, often with whatever vegetables are available early in the voyage, like onions or peas, until it forms a stew of sorts, known as lobscouse or salmagnutti. But the primary flavor is, and always will be, salt. This diet is brutally monotonous. The Navy had a weekly menu that was almost identical across the entire fleet. Monday was beef, Tuesday was pork, Wednesday was oatmeal and cheese, and so on. You knew exactly what you would be eating every day for the entire voyage. The only variation came from the occasional fresh fish caught by the crew, or the rapid depletion of the fresh vegetables and livestock that were brought on board at the start of a journey. There's a historical debate about just how bad this food really was. The official naval regulations, the victualling list, look quite generous on paper, allocating a pound of biscuit and a gallon of beer per day, plus several pounds of meat per week. Some historians argue that for many of the poorest sailors, this was a more reliable and substantial diet than they would have on land. At least on the ship, you were guaranteed a meal. Others argue that the quality of the provisions was often appalling. Corrupt victualling contractors would supply the Navy with the worst quality flour and rancid meat, knowing it wouldn't be eaten for months, by which time it would be too late to complain. The discovery of weevils in the biscuit was not a surprise, it was an expectation. One of the more disgusting delicacies that could arise from this system was a thing called slush. This was the fat that was skimmed off the top of the pots where the salted meat was boiled. It was a greasy, lumpy substance that was collected by the ship's cook. In theory, it was to be used for greasing the rigging or waterproofing leather. However, the cook, as a perk of his job, was often allowed to sell this slush back to the sailors, who would use it as a sort of spread on their biscuits, a flavor enhancer for their miserable food. The thought of eating this congealed, salty fat is repulsive, but for a man starved of flavor, it was a treasured commodity. So use it at your mess, soaking your weevil Y biscuit in a thin, salty stew. This is your fuel. It's not for pleasure. It's for survival. And as you chew and chew and chew, you can feel the salt drying out your mouth. You're incredibly thirsty. Luckily, the most anticipated moment of the day is about to arrive, the rum ration. The food may be a trial, but the drink is a ritual. After the midday meal, the long-awaited call echoes across the deck of spirits. This is the moment the entire crew has been waiting for. It's time for the daily rum ration, a tradition as central to the Royal Navy as the anchor itself. You and your messmates gather around a large tub, the grog tub, which is placed in the waist of the ship under the watchful eye of the master at arms and the purser. The atmosphere is noticeably lighter, a rare moment of collective cheer. First, let's talk about the water. The stuff you drink on this ship is nothing like the clear, clean water you knew on land. Fresh water is a precious, finite resource. It's stored in large wooden casks in the ship's hold. Over weeks and months, at sea, this water goes bad. The casks themselves are not perfectly sterile, and the water inside becomes stagnant. Algae and slime begin to grow on the inside of the barrels, giving the water a greenish or brownish tint and a distinctly slick, greasy texture. It smells swampy and tastes foul. Sailors would try to hold their noses while they drank it. As we've discussed, if the casks are stored near the bilge, the contamination can be even worse. This is where the rum comes in. It wasn't just for morale, it was a practical solution to a number of problems. In the early 18th century, sailors were given a daily ration of beer, a full gallon of it. But the beer also went bad quickly on long voyages. Rum, with its high alcohol content, didn't spoil. So, the Navy switched to a daily ration of half a pint of rum per man. However, giving a sailor half a pint of neat, overproof rum in the middle of the day had predictable consequences: widespread drunkenness and a decline in discipline and safety. Men would save up their rations to get roaring drunk, leading to fights and accidents. So, in 1740, an admiral named Edward Vernon, nicknamed Old Grog because of the waterproof girogram cloak he often wore, came up with a solution. He ordered that the rum ration should be mixed with water. The official ratio was 1 quart rum to 4 parts water, a ratio that historians still debate, as it likely varied from ship to ship and captain to captain. This new concoction was, inevitably, named grog in his honor. The mixture was served twice a day, once at noon and once at the end of the working day. Mixing the rum with the foul-tasting water made the water more palatable. The alcohol killed some of the germs, making it safer to drink. Then the dilution made it much harder for sailors to get debilitatingly drunk. It was a brilliant piece of management. You watch as the purser's steward carefully measures out the rum and mixes it with water in the tub. Sometimes, if they were available, sugar and lime or lemon juice would be added. This addition was a game changer, though its true importance wasn't fully understood at the time. You get your portion, a tot of the brownish liquid in a small cup. The smell is sharp and sweet, cutting through the other odors of the ship. You take a sip. It's strong, but the water takes the edge off. It's warming, spreading a pleasant glow through your chest. For a few brief moments, the hardships of the day, the raw knees, the aching back, the constant dampness seemed to recede. This is why the grog ration was so beloved. It was a predictable pleasure in a life of unpredictable misery. It was a social lubricant, a medicine, and a small taste of comfort. The distribution of grog was a carefully managed ceremony. The call-up spirits was a formal affair. The mixture was prepared in public to ensure no one was cheating the crew of their rightful share. Each mess would send a representative to collect the ration for their group. Drunkenness was still a problem, of course, and sailors caught being drunk and disorderly would be severely punished. Often by having their grog ration stopped for a period of punishment sailors dreaded more than almost any other. A little-known fact about the grog is its connection to the American Revolution. The Sugar Act of 1764, which imposed taxes on molasses, a key ingredient in rum imported into the American colonies, was deeply unpopular. This affected not only colonial merchants, but also the supply of cheap rum for the Royal Navy, which sorts much of it from the Caribbean trade. The tax created logistical headaches and was part of the growing list of grievances that fueled revolutionary sentiment. So in a way, your daily drink is tied up in the grand political movements of the age. The academic debate here often revolves around the true motivation for the grog ration. Was it primarily a health measure, designed to make the water safe, or was it a tool of social control, meant to keep the men happy and compliant? The answer is likely both. The Admiralty was a pragmatic institution. They knew a happy crew was an efficient crew, and a healthy crew was a fighting crew. Grog served both purposes beautifully. You finish your tot of grog, the warmth lingers. The world seems a slightly better place. For a few minutes, you and your messmates might share a joke or a story. The grog fosters a sense of community, a brief respite from the rigid hierarchy of the ship, but the moment is fleeting. The boatswain's call will sound again soon, signaling the return to work. The pleasant buzz will fade, but the memory of it will be enough to get you through the rest of the afternoon. It's a small mercy, but in this world, you learn to cherish the small mercies. Your world is made of wood, rope, and canvas, populated by men. But as you settle into the rhythm of the ship, you become increasingly aware of another population, a shadow crew that vastly outnumbers the human one. They are the stowaways, the pests, the true masters of this floating ecosystem. You've met the lice and the weevils. Now it's time to get acquainted with the rest of the menagerie. The most formidable of these uninvited guests are the rats. Not the timid field mice of the countryside, but bold, hardened ship's rats. They're everywhere. You hear them at night, their claws scratching inside the walls and their high-pitched squeaks echoing in the darkness of the hold. You see them darting along the thick anchor cables, their beady eyes glinting in the lantern light. They are fearless, driven by a constant, gnawing hunger. They are a serious threat to the ship's provisions. A colony of rats can gnaw its way through sacks of biscuit and grain at an astonishing rate, spoiling far more than they eat. They are known to chew through the corners of water casks, causing precious fresh water to leak away into the bilge. They will eat anything leather, tallow from candles, soap, and even, according to some grim sailors' tales, the toes or fingers of men sleeping off a heavy ration of grog. The crew wages a constant, low-grade war against them. Some ships kept cats or terriers on board specifically for rat catching. These animals were prized members of the crew, their hunting prowess celebrated. A good rat tur was worth its weight in gold. Sailors also set traps, but the rats were notoriously cunning and quickly learned to avoid them. More often, it was a matter of grim coexistence. You learn to store your few personal possessions in a sea chest, not just for security from other sailors, but from the gnawing teeth of the rats. Then there are the cockroaches. As mentioned, sailors often called them Bombay runners or steam bugs because they seem to thrive in the hot, damp conditions below decks, particularly near the galley fires. They move in swarms, a rustling, brown carpet that emerges from the cracks the moment the lights are dimmed. They get into everything. You might find one floating in your grog or scuttling out of a bread bag. Their pervasiveness was a source of constant disgust. While not as destructive as rats, their presence was a visceral reminder of the ship's filth. They tainted food with their droppings and their musty smell. This constant battle against pests led to some strange shipboard practices. One of the most extreme was fumigation. When a ship was in port for a refit and the hold was empty, it might be sealed up and fumigated. This involved burning brimstone, sulfur, or other noxious substances in pots, filling the entire ship with poisonous smoke designed to kill every last rat, louse, and cockroach. It was a dramatic, and often only temporarily effective, solution. The pests always found a way back on board, hitching a ride on new supplies, or simply scurrying up the mooring ropes from the dock. A fascinating, and slightly horrifying, small detail of this pest-ridden life is that naval surgeons of the time would sometimes use cockroaches for medical purposes. ground-up cockroaches were an ingredient in some folk remedies, believed to have diuretic properties. Another, more gruesome, practice was the use of maggots to clean wounds. While this sounds barbaric, it's actually an example of accidental good medicine. Surgeons observed that wounds that became infested with maggots often healed better and were less likely to become gangrenous. This is because the maggots would eat only the dead, decaying tissue, leaving the healthy tissue behind. It's a practice that has even been revived in modern medicine, known as maggot therapy. On an 18th century warship, however, it wasn't a therapy. It wasn't a therapy, it was just a grim and sometimes useful fact of life. The historical debate around this topic often centers on the Navy's official response to pests. Did the Admiralty have a formal, fleet-wide pest control strategy, or was it left to the discretion of individual captains? The evidence suggests it was largely the latter. While regulations existed for the cleanliness of the ship, the methods for dealing with vermin were often based on tradition, folklore, and the personal fastidiousness of the captain, offering bounties for rat tails. Others were more resigned, accepting the infestation as an unavoidable part of sea life. For you, these creatures are not an abstract problem, they are part of your sensory world. It's the rustle in the dark that makes you jump. It's the acrid smell of cockroach infestation that clings to the galley. It's the nagging feeling that you are not just sharing your space with 700 men, but with hundreds of thousands of tiny, scurrying, crawling, and biting things. They are in your food, in your bed, and in the very walls of your wooden world. They are a constant, living testament to the fact that this ship is not just a vessel of war, but a complex, decaying, and teeming ecosystem of its own. You are not its master, you are just its largest, most temporary inhabitant. You've been at sea for a few weeks now. Your skin is coated in a permanent film of salt and grime. Your hair is stiff with tar-scented air, and your clothes, well, your clothes have taken on a life of their own. They are stiff, stained, and smell like a combination of sweat, seawater, and the general funk of the gun deck. The thought of washing them becomes an urgent, pressing need. But hell, the simple act of doing laundry, a mundane chore on land, is a logistical nightmare at sea. The first and most obvious problem is the lack of fresh water. Every drop of fresh water on board is strictly rationed for drinking and cooking. Using it to wash clothes would be an unthinkable luxury, an offense punishable by the master-at-arms. So your only option is to use what you have in abundant salt water. You take your spare shirt and trousers if you're lucky enough to have a spare set up on deck. The common method is to put your clothes in a small canvas bag, tie a rope to it, and trail it behind the ship for a few hours. The motion of the water is supposed to force the dirt out. This is known as keel hauling your washing. After a while, you haul the heavy, waterlogged bag back on board. The result is disappointing. While some of the surface grime might be gone, the clothes are now thoroughly impregnated with salt. When they dry, they become stiffened, abrasive. The salt crystals left in the fabric chafe your skin, causing rashes and sores, especially in sensitive areas like your armpits and groin. These saltwater sores are a common complaint among sailors. They are painful, slow to heal in a damp environment, and can easily become infected. So you've traded dirt for salt, and the result is arguably worse. The clothes don't feel clean, just different. And they certainly don't smell fresh. They smell of the sea, which is a marginal improvement on the smell of stale sweat, but not by much. What about soap? Soap existed, of course, but it was a precious commodity. The ship's purser might have a small supply for sale, but it was expensive, and you had very little money. What soap was available was often of poor quality, a harsh lye soap that didn't lather well in cold salt water. It was more often used by officers or for specific cleaning tasks, not for general laundry by the common sailor. Some sailors developed their own makeshift solutions. One was to use urine. The ammonia in stale urine has cleaning properties, and sailors would sometimes collect it in a tub to soak their clothes in. This might have been effective at breaking down grease and dirt, but one can only imagine the smell. It was a desperate measure for a desperate situation. The challenge of laundry highlights the class divide once again. The officers had servants. Their laundry would be done for them, likely with a small allocated amount of fresh water and better quality soap. A captain might even have a dedicated washerman on his personal staff if he was wealthy enough. The visible difference between a lieutenant's clean, white shirt and your own stiff, grayish one was another constant, visual reminder of the ship's hierarchy. A fascinating cold weather laundry fact is the Norwegians steam cleaned. In the icy waters of the North Atlantic, sailors would sometimes hang their wet, salt water-washed clothes in the rigging to freeze solid. Once frozen, they would beat the clothes with a stick. The theory was that the ice crystals, containing the dirt, would be shattered and knocked out of the fabric. It was a form of freeze-drying, an ingenious use of the harsh environment to achieve a semblance of cleanliness. Historians often look at naval supply logs and sailors' personal journals to piece together the reality of clothing and laundry. At sea, the official clothing issued by the Navy, known as slops, was basic, durable, and notoriously ill-fitting. A sailor was given a certain allowance to purchase these items from the purser. But how often could he afford a new shirt? How did men in different climates adapt? The records show a constant struggle. For example, on long voyages in the tropics, the constant dampness and sweat meant that clothes would rot right off a man's back. Mildew and fungus were a constant problem. For you, the problem is more immediate. Your freshly washed clothes are now drying in the wind, strung up on a piece of rope in the rigging. They flap stiffly, like cardboard cutouts of clothes. You know that when you put them on, they will be scratchy and uncomfortable. You look at your current set of clothes, equally grimy. This is your entire wardrobe. This lack of clean clothing is not just a matter of comfort. It's a direct threat to your health. Your dirty clothes are a perfect home for your constant companions, the body lice. As we've established, being unable to properly wash your clothes and bedding means you can never get rid of the lice, and therefore you can never escape the threat of the gale fever they carry. Your stiff, salty, permanently grubby shirt is not just a uniform of your trade, it's a potential shroud. You resign yourself to the situation. Cleanliness, you are learning, is a luxury of the land. Here at sea, you are in a constant state of managed filth. You can scrub the decks, but they remain damp. You can wash your clothes, but they remain salty and stiff. You can pump the bilge, but the smell never truly leaves. It is a war of attrition against grime, and you are losing. The routine of the ship has become your life. The holy stoning, the monotonous food, the brief comfort of the grog, it's a cycle that marks the passing of days. But one morning, the rhythm is broken. The man who sleeps in the hammock next to yours doesn't get up when the boatswain's call sounds. His name is Thomas, the young weaver from Bristol you learned about on your first night. One of your mess mates gives his hammock a shake. Up you get Tom, lash and stow. Thomas groans, a weak, feverish sound. He pushes himself up, his face pale and slick with sweat, his eyes glassy and confused. He shivers violently despite the stuffy air of the gun deck. The old sailor in your mess takes one look at him and his face hardens. It's the fever, he says, his voice low and grim. He's talking about typhus, gale fever, ship fever, spotted fever. It has many names, but it is the same invisible killer. It has been incubating silently within the ship's population, passed from man to man by the ever-present body lice, and now it has claimed its first visible victim in your small circle. Two of his messmates help the shivering Thomas out of his hammock. He can barely stand. The surgeon's mate, a young man with a weary, seen-it-all expression, is summoned. He takes a brief look at Thomas, feels his hot forehead, and nods grimly. "Sick bay," he says, and just like that, Thomas is led away, disappearing down a ladder into the darker realms of the ship. You watch him go, a cold knot tightening in your stomach. You slept just inches away from him. You shared the same air, the same space. The lice that fed on him last night could be in your own bedding right now. The fear is palpable. It spreads through the gun deck faster than the disease itself. Men eye each other with suspicion. The cough, a sneeze, a moment of weariness, all are now viewed with a new, terrifying significance. The close-knit community of the mess, once a source of comfort, now feels like a trap. The disease itself is brutal. It begins with chills, headache, and a high fever. After a few days, a characteristic rash of dark, spotted marks appears, which is where the name spotted fever comes from. The victim becomes delirious, often babbling incoherently. In severe cases, it leads to stupor, coma, and death. Mortality rates on board ships could be staggering, sometimes reaching 20-30% of the crew during a serious outbreak. The ship's surgeon does what he can, but his methods are based on the flawed medical knowledge of the time. The primary treatment for fever was bloodletting. The surgeon believes that the fever is caused by an excess of bad humors in the blood, and that by draining some of it, he can restore the body's balance. He will use a lancet to open a vein, draining a specific amount of blood into a bowl. For a body already weakened by disease and malnutrition, this practice is often more harmful than helpful, leading to weakness, shock, and sometimes death. Other common treatments included administering purgative asymptomatics medicines designed to induce vomiting and diarrhea to cleanse the body. The patient would be given a diet of thin gruel and barley water. The surgeon would also stress the importance of ventilation, using wind sails to try and funnel fresh air down to the sick bay to disperse the miasma, the bad air believed to cause the disease. This, at least, was a step in the right direction, even if the reasoning was wrong. A fascinating and tragic piece of trivia is that the medical community of the time was agonizingly close to understanding the real cause. Naval surgeons like James Lind and Gilbert Blaine meticulously documented the conditions on board. They observed that typhus outbreaks almost always followed the arrival of new recruits, especially those brought by press gangs from city jails. They noted the correlation between overcrowding, filth, and the spread of the fever. They advocated for new recruits to be stripped, washed, and given new, clean clothes before being allowed to mix with the general crew. This quarantine process was one of the most effective preventative measures, but it was oft unimplemented sporadically, if at all. They knew filth was the enemy, but the specific role of the tiny louse as the vector remained a mystery to them. The historical debate here is a poignant one. How many tens of thousands of lives could have been saved if the louse-vector connection had been made just a few decades earlier? It highlights the gap between observation and scientific understanding. The naval surgeons were brilliant observers, but they lacked the germ theory framework needed to connect the dots correctly. They saw all the pieces of the puzzle but couldn't quite assemble them. Back on the gun deck, the mood is somber. The space where Thomas's hammock used to hang seems like a gaping wound. The ship's carpenter will be ordered to scrub the area with vinegar, and Thomas's bedding and clothes will be thrown overboard, a small, almost ritualistic attempt to purge the contamination. But everyone knows it's a token gesture. The lice are everywhere. You lie in your hammock that night, hyper-aware of every itch, every tickle. You think of Thomas shivering in the dark, foul-smelling sick bay. The threat of a French cannonball is a distant, almost abstract fear. This is real. This is inside the ship with you. It's a silent, patient hunter, and it wears the face of your friends. For the first time, you truly understand you're on this voyage is not the enemy fleet, but the very air you breathe and the fabric you sleep in. The fear of typhus is a sharp, immediate terror. But as the weeks turn into months and the ship pushes further into the vast emptiness of the ocean, another, more insidious enemy begins to make its presence felt. It's a slower, more creeping horror, a disease that doesn't strike with fever, but with a gradual, systematic decay of the body from the inside out. It is the curse of the long-haul sailor's scurvy. It starts subtly. You feel unusually tired, a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that no amount of sleep can fix. Your muscles ache. You feel irritable and depressed, the vibrant blue of the ocean seeming dull and monotonous. At first, you dismiss it as the result of hard labor and the dreary routine. But then other signs appear. You notice your gums. They feel soft, spongy. When you chew on your hard biscuit, they bleed easily, leaving a coppery taste in your mouth. Soon, they become swollen and purplish, growing over your teeth until it becomes painful to eat it all. Your breath takes on a foul, putrid odor. Your teeth, their foundations rotting away, begin to loosen in their sockets. You can wiggle them with your tongue. Eventually, they will fall out. Then come the spots. Dark, purplish-black blotches appear on your skin, particularly on your legs and thighs. They look like old bruises, but you don't remember any injury. These spots, called petechia, are caused by spontaneous bleeding under the skin as your blood vessels become fragile and break down. The decay accelerates. Old wounds, even scars that healed years ago, can mysteriously reopen, the tissue seeming to dissolve. Joints swell and become excruciatingly painful, making it agony to climb the rigging or even walk across the deck. Your body is literally falling apart. The essential glue that holds it together, collagen, can no longer be produced by your body, and the effects are catastrophic. You see it happening all around you. Men who were strong and capable a month ago are now hobbling, wheezing shadows of their former selves. They lie in their hammocks, too weak to move, their limbs swollen and discolored. The gun deck, already a place of discomfort, begins to sound like a hospital ward, filled with the groans of men in constant, agonizing pain. What is this terrifying affliction? It's the result of a severe deficiency in vitamin C. Your diet of hard biscuit and salted meat contains absolutely none of it. The fresh vegetables and fruit that were brought on board at the start of the voyage, onions, cabbages, lemons, are long gone, consumed in the first few weeks. Now your body is starved of a nutrient it cannot produce on its own, a nutrient essential for countless bodily functions, especially the maintenance of connective tissues. The naval surgeons of the time were baffled. They had countless theories about the cause of scurvy. Some believed it was caused by the damp sea air, others by the salty diet, and still others by laziness and despair. The treatments they prescribed were often useless or bizarre. They might give a man an elixir of vitriol, a solution of sulfuric acid, or have him drink copious amounts of seawater. Some even recommended burying a man up to his neck in worms, and if the ship was near a coastline, a treatment as pointless as it was strange. This is where one of the most famous stories in medical history unfolds. In 1747, a naval surgeon named James Lind, serving on HMS Salisbury, conducted what is often considered one of the first controlled clinical trials. He took 12 sailors suffering from scurvy and divided them into 6 pairs. He gave each pair a different daily supplement in addition to their normal diet. One pair got cider, another got the elixir of vitriol, a third got seawater, a fourth got a paste of garlic and mustard seed, a fifth got barley water, and the final, lucky pair received 2 oranges and 1 lemon each day. The results were dramatic and unequivocal. The 2 men eating the citrus fruit made a stunningly rapid recovery. One was fit for duty again in just 6 days. Lind had found the cure. But here's the frustrating part of the story, a classic case of institutional inertia. Despite Lind's published findings, the Admiralty was incredibly slow to act. His discovery was met with skepticism. Lemons and oranges were expensive and difficult to preserve on long voyages. Other, more influential medical figures pushed their own pet theories. The debate raged for decades. It wasn't until 1795, nearly 50 years after Lind's experiment and the year after he died, that the Royal Navy finally made lemon or lime juice a mandatory part of a sailor's diet. The effect was immediate and revolutionary. Scurvy, which had killed more sailors than all enemy cannon combined, was virtually eradicated from the fleet, giving the British a massive strategic advantage during the Napoleonic Wars. Historians still debate why it took so long for the Admiralty to adopt such a simple, effective cure. Was it bureaucratic stubbornness, professional jealousy in the medical community, the high cost of citrus fruit, or a failure to understand the concept of a deficiency disease in an era dominated by theories of humors in me? It was likely a combination of all these factors. For you, in the pre-1795 Navy, there is no lemon juice. There is only the slow, agonizing wait. You chew on a piece of your salty, tough beef, the pain in your gums immense. You feel a loose tooth shift. You look at your shipmates, their faces gaunt, their bodies bruised and broken by this invisible enemy. You are all slowly wasting away in the middle of a vast, blue desert, starved for something you don't even have a name for. The ship, once a symbol of strength and power, has become a floating charnel house, its crew dissolving from within. Faced with a rising tide of lice, scurvy, and general grime, you might feel a powerful urge to just be clean. Not just for comfort, but for survival. But the struggle for personal hygiene on this ship is a constant, uphill battle against the environment, the regulations, and the sheer lack of resources. Let's start with the most basic act: washing your face and hands. You can't just wander over to a basin and turn on a tap. As you know, fresh water is guarded more jealously than gold. The small amount you are allocated is for drinking. Using it for washing is out of the question. So, once again, you turn to the sea. A bucket is lowered over the side on a rope, hauled up brimming with cold, clean seawater. This is your sink. You splash the water on your face. It's shockingly cold, but invigorating. It cuts through the grime and the sleepiness. You can use this water to wash your hands before eating, a small ritual of cleanliness that some sailors fastidiously maintain. But it's still salt water. It leaves a thin, sticky film of salt on your skin. It doesn't lather well with the cheap, harsh soap you might have managed to acquire. And it does little to combat the greasy, tar-like dirt that gets ingrained in the skin of your hands from handling the rigging. Still, it's better than nothing. It's a moment of personal care in a world that seems designed to strip it away. What about a full-body wash? A bath or shower is a fantasy. The only way to get a proper dousing is to wait for a rainstorm and stand on the deck, letting the fresh water wash over you, a rare and welcome treat. Or, in warm climates, the captain might give permission for the men to swim alongside the ship when it's becalmed. This is a chance for a full-body plunge, a glorious moment of freedom and cleanliness, but it's a risky activity. Sharks were a real and constant danger, and lookouts would have to be posted. A strong, unexpected current could also sweep a man away from the ship. So for the most part, your daily hygiene routine is a spit bath at best, a quick wipe down with a damp, salty rag. Then there's your hair and beard. Barbers did not exist on most naval ships. The ship's surgeon or his mates might be called upon to cut hair, but it wasn't their primary duty. Most sailors simply let their hair grow long, often tying it back in a ponytail or pigtail. To keep it from flying around in the wind and getting tangled in the rigging, they would coat it with a mixture of tar and tallow animal fat. This created a stiff, waterproof, and profoundly dirty hairstyle. It kept the hair under control, but it also made it a perfect breeding ground for lice and was impossible to wash clean. This tarred pigtail is one of the most iconic and misunderstood images of the 18th century sailor. Shading was equally difficult. It required a sharp razor, soap, and some skill to avoid cutting yourself on a moving ship. Many sailors simply let their beards grow, trimming them occasionally with a knife. A full beard was common, a practical response to the difficulty of regular shaving. Oral hygiene was, by modern standards, horrific. You've already heard about the effects of scurvy on the gums and teeth. But even for a healthy sailor, Dental care was non-existent. There were no toothbrushes. Some sailors might have cleaned their teeth by rubbing them with a rough cloth and salt, or by chewing on a twig. But for the most part, teeth were left to fend for themselves against a diet of hard biscuits and salty meat. When a tooth became rotten and painful, the only solution was extraction. This lovely job usually fell to the ship's surgeon, or more often the carpenter, who had the strongest pliers. The procedure was brutal, no anesthetic. Just a shot of rum, a strong pair of pincers, and a whole lot of screaming. This brings us to a strange but fascinating piece of historical hygiene, the piss-tail. In some corners of the ship, particularly in the hold or on the lower decks, tubs or buckets would be set out as communal urinals to save men the long trip to the heads, especially at night or in bad weather. These were known as piss-tails. While practical, they were yet another source of foul odor and filth that had to be regularly emptied and cleaned. The urine collected, as mentioned before, was sometimes even repurposed for cleaning clothes. It's a perfect example of the shipboard mentality. Waste is a resource, and convenience often trumps sanitation. The historical debate around personal hygiene often revolves around motivation. Did sailors even care about being clean? Some contemporary accounts, usually written by officers, portray the common sailor as being naturally slovenly, uncontent to live in filth. But sailors' own diaries and letters often tell a different story. They write about the misery of lice, the pain of saltwater sores, and the simple joy of a freshwater rain shower. It seems less a matter of not caring, and more a matter of being defeated by the overwhelming odds. Why bother with a meticulous cleaning routine when you know that within an hour you'll be covered in grime again? It was a constant battle, and for many, it was easier to simply surrender to a state of functional filth. You stand on the deck, having just splashed your face with cold seawater. You feel momentarily refreshed, but you look at your hands, the dirt still ingrained around your fingernails. You can feel the stiff, teary texture of your own hair. You are doing the best you can with what you have, but what you have is a bucket of salt water and a world of dirt. Your personal space has shrunk to the surface of your own skin, and even that is a territory you can never fully reclaim. Sickness and injury are not abstract concepts on this ship, they are daily realities. A slip on a wet deck, a rope snapping under tension, a block falling from the rigging, accidents are common. And when they happen, or when the fevers and scurvy take hold, you are sent to the man who holds the power of life and death in his hands, the ship's surgeon. You get your first proper look at him when a sailor from another mess falls from a ladder, his leg bending at an unnatural angle. The surgeon is summoned. HES not the distinguished, silver-haired gentleman you might imagine. HES a practical man, often young, his face etched with a permanent weariness. His coat, a dark, heavy wool, is stained with substances you don't want to identify. He examines the sailor's leg with a practiced, detached air and gives his diagnosis a compound fracture. The man will need to be taken to the cockpit. The surgeon's domain is not a bright, clean clinic. His primary workspace during an emergency or a battle is the cockpit, located on the orlop deck, below the waterline. This location is chosen for a reason. It's protected from direct cannon fire. But it's also one of the worst places on the ship. It's dark, cramped, and poorly ventilated. It's often situated near the ship's cable lockers, so the noise is deafening. There are no dedicated, sterile operating rooms. The surgeon works on a makeshift table, often just planks laid over sea chests, in a space shared with the midshipmen's berths. The surgeon's most important possession is his toolkit. It's a wooden chest lined with velvet, containing an array of fearsome-looking instruments. There are saws of various sizes for amputations, long, sharp knives for cutting flesh, probes for exploring wounds, and heavy forceps for extracting musket balls or bone splinters. These tools are made of steel and have ivory or wooden handles, and they are not sterilized. The concept of germs and antiseptic surgery is more than a century away. A surgeon would wipe his tools clean on a rag after operation, perhaps wash them in water, and put them away. Before the next operation, he might give them another quick wipe. That's it. The same saw could be used to amputate a gangrenous leg and then, minutes later, to cut into a different man's flesh, transferring whatever morbid matter was on the blade. Surgeons believed that laudable pus, a thick, creamy pus, was a sign of healthy healing, not the raging bacterial infection it actually was. You watch as the injured sailor is carried down into the gloom of the orlop deck. The surgeon follows, his mate carrying the dreaded tool chest. The only light in the cockpit comes from a few swaying lanterns, held by boys, whose job is to stay steady no matter what horrors they witness. There is no anesthetic. That invention is also decades in the future. The only thing offered to the patient is a large dose of rum or laudanum, an opium tincture to dull the senses, and a leather strap or a wooden block to bite down on to stop him from screaming or biting off his own tongue. Several strong men are needed to hold the patient down on the table. Amputation is the surgeon's signature procedure. In an age before antibiotics, a severe, compound fracture or a mangled limb was a death sentence. Infection and gangrene were almost certain to set in. The only hope for survival was to remove the limb cleanly, above the site of the injury. A skilled surgeon could perform an amputation in a matter of minutes, a mercy, given the circumstances. He would slice through the skin and muscle with a long knife, use a retractor to pull the flesh back, saw through the bone with a few quick strokes, and then tie off the arteries with silk ligatures. The stump would then be sealed with a hot iron or a coating of tar, a brutal but effective way to cauterize the wound. A strange and grim detail of the surgeon's work is his relationship with the ship's carpenter. The surgeon mended men, the carpenter mended the ship. Their work often overlapped. The carpenter's tools were sometimes used for rough bone work, and the carpenter was often called upon to help restrain patients or dispose of amputated limbs. The surgeon's mate, in turn, was often a boy who was learning the trade through apprenticeship, seeing these horrors from a young age. There is a historical debate about the skill and status of naval surgeons in the 18th century. For a long time, they were dismissed as sawbones and butchers. But modern research has shown that many were highly trained and dedicated professionals. They had to pass rigorous examinations to qualify for the Navy. They were skilled anatomists and experienced trauma surgeons. They worked in appalling conditions with limited knowledge, but many did their absolute best to save lives. Surgeons like James Lind were at the forefront of medical research. The problem wasn't a lack of skill, but a lack of fundamental scientific understanding about infection and disease. You don't see the operation, but you hear it. A single, muffled scream from below decks that is quickly cut off. Later, you see the surgeon emerge, his hands undaproned, bloody. He looks exhausted. His mate follows, carrying a bucket. You don't look inside. The post-operative care is just as dangerous as the surgery itself. The patient is taken to the sick bay, the dark, stuffy area on the orlop deck. There, his open wound is exposed to the same foul air, the same lice, the same risk of typhus and other infections as everyone else. The chances of a fatal post-operative infection are incredibly high. The surgeon has fixed the immediate problem, the broken leg, but has created a new, gaping entry point for the invisible enemies that swarm the ship. Seeing him at work, you decide you will do everything in your power to never, ever need his services. The ship is a city, and like any city, it needs a steady supply of food. The salted meat and hard tack in the hold can last for months, but there is a deep craving and a biological need for fresh food. To meet this demand, at least for the first part of the voyage, the ship carries its own farm. A small, noisy, and very smelly one. As you move about the decks, you become familiar with the non-human passengers who are not pests. Stored in pens in the waist of the ship or on the gun decks are chickens, geese, and sometimes a few pigs. Their clucking and squealing becomes part of the ship's soundscape. Most prized of all is the ship's cow, or sometimes a few goats, kept to provide fresh milk, primarily for the captain and his officers. This floating menagerie is a source of both comfort and filth. The sight and sound of the animals is a small, welcome reminder of life on land, a break from the endless monotony of wood and water. A fresh egg is a treasure beyond price, usually reserved for the sick or the officer's table. The promise of fresh roast pork after weeks of salty mahogany is a powerful boost to morale. But the animals are also a significant burden on the ship's hygiene. They need to be housed, fed, and watered. The pens take up valuable space on the already crowded decks. And, of course, they produce waste. A lot of it. The animal pens are a constant source of filth and stink. The job of mucking them out is one of the most unpleasant on the ship, assigned to the junior sailors. The animal waste mixes with the other dirt on the deck, gets washed around with seawater during cleaning, and contributes to the general miasma of the vessel. The smell, especially on a hot, windless day, can be overpowering. Furthermore, the animals are living in the same squalid conditions as the men. They are prone to disease, and their health is a constant concern. A sick chicken or a pig that refuses to eat is a serious problem. Their fodder sacks of grain and feed also needs to be stored, taking up space in the hold and providing yet another feast for the ship's rats and cockroaches. The slaughter of these animals is a public and often messy event. It's usually performed by the ship's butcher, a job that often falls to the cook's assistant. A pig is hoisted up, its throat is cut, and it is bled out on the deck. The blood runs into the scuppers that drains at the edge of the deck and is washed away with buckets of seawater, leaving a temporary red stain on the white planks. The carcass is then scalded, scraped, and butchered right there in the open, in full view of the crew. While the prospect of fresh meat is exciting, the process itself is a visceral, bloody affair that adds another layer of gore and grime to the daily routine. A little-known aspect of this floating farm is the hierarchy of consumption. These animals are not for everyone. The cow's milk, as mentioned, is for the officers. The first pick of the fresh meat also goes to the captain's table. The rest of the officers get their share next. Only what remains is distributed among the common sailors. Sometimes, the captain might order a general feast for the crew to mark a victory or a holiday, but for the most part, you will be smelling the roast pork from the officer's galley long before you get to taste any yourself. There's a historical debate about the practicality of keeping livestock on board. Was it worth the effort from a purely logistical standpoint? It was incredibly inefficient. The amount of fresh water and food the animals consumed was enormous. A cow can drink up to 30 gallons of water a day, a huge drain on the ship's precious supply. Some naval reformers argued that it was better to use the space and resources to store more preserved food. However, the psychological and health benefits of fresh food, even if only for a short time, were undeniable. The Admiralty never banned the practice, leaving it to the discretion of individual captains. It remained a tradition, a testament to the human desire for a taste of home, no matter how impractical. A particularly charming piece of animal-related lore is the story of ship's pets. Beyond the official rat-catching cats, sailors would often keep their own pets, such as parrots bought in exotic ports, or even monkeys. These animals provided companionship and amusement, a small spark of joy in a harsh world. The famous example is the goat that accompanied Captain Cook on his first circumnavigation of the globe. She provided milk for the officers for the entire voyage and, upon her return to England, was admitted as a pensioner to Greenwich Hospital and wore a silver collar gifted by the Admiralty. She was a celebrity, a furry hero of the age of sail. For you, the animals are a mixed blessing. You curse the smell of the chicken coop when you're trying to sleep nearby. You have to step carefully to avoid the droppings on the deck. But then you hear the cow lowing in the morning, a sound so profoundly normal and terrestrial. And for a moment, the vast, alienating ocean feels a little less lonely. These animals are, like you, captives on this wooden world, living symbols of a life you left behind and a future meal you desperately hope you'll get a share of. Life on the ship is governed by a rigid set of rules, and the punishment for breaking them is swift, public, and brutal. The foundation of Royal Navy discipline is the threat of physical pain, and the primary instrument of that pain is a fearsome tool known as the cat o' nine tails. You witness it for the first time when 2 sailors are found guilty of fighting and dereliction of duty. The entire crew is summoned on deck. The order is given all hands to witness punishment. Everyone must watch. This is not just about punishing the guilty, it's about reminding everyone else of the consequences of stepping out of line. The 2 men are stripped to the waist and tied to a grating or a cannon. Their faces are grim, set in a mask of defiance or terror. The captain reads the articles of war they have violated. The surgeon stands nearby, not to offer comfort, but to determine if the man is fit to endure the punishment and to revive him if he faints, so the punishment can be completed. Then the boatswain mate steps forward, holding the cat. It's a whip with a short, thick rope handle and 9 knotted cords of thin rope as tails. It's designed not just to sting, but to bite and tear at the flesh. The boatswain's mate is a powerful man, chosen for his strength. He takes his position, measures the distance, and then, with a full swing of his arm, he lays the first lash across the man's back. The sound is sickening, a wet, heavy slap that echoes across the silent deck. A row of red welts appears instantly on the man's skin. He groans, his body tensing against the ropes. The boatswain's mate takes his time, allowing the pain of the first blow to sink in before delivering the second. And so it continues. The count called out loud for each stroke. 1, 2, 3. By the 6th lash, the welts have broken open, and blood begins to flow, trickling down the man's back. The crew watches in dead silence, their faces impassive. You feel a wave of nausea. This is organist, ritual is ed violence, designed to terrorize and subdue. The standard punishment was 12 lashes, but for serious offenses, it could be far more. After the full dozen, the man is cut down his back a bloody ruin. The second sailor is then tied up, and the horrific ordeal is repeated. The punishment doesn't end when the lashing stops. The real danger comes afterwards. In the filthy, germ-ridden environment of the ship, these open wounds are a breeding ground for infection. The surgeon will order the man's back to be rinsed with salt water. This is excruciatingly painful, but it's the only antiseptic available. It's a classic example of 18th century medical logic fighting pain with more pain in the hope of preventing a greater evil. After the saltwater rinse, a dressing might be applied to rinse, but the risk of tetanus, gangrene, or other infections is incredibly high. The flogging could easily turn into a death sentence. A little known and particularly grim variation of this was flogging around the fleet. For the most serious crimes like mutiny, a sailor would be put in a boat and taken from ship to ship in the harbor, receiving a portion of his total lashes at each stop. It was a day-long spectacle of torture, designed to send a message to the entire fleet. Historians have long debated the effectiveness and morality of flogging. The Admiralty and most officers saw it as an absolute necessity. They believed that only the fear of the cat could maintain order among a crew of rough, often unwilling men. They would argue that without it, discipline would collapse and the ship would be lost. Reformers, on the other hand, argued that it was a barbaric and counterproductive. They believed that better pay, better conditions, and more humane leadership would be far more effective at motivating men than the threat of torture. This debate raged for over a century, with flogging not being officially abolished in the Royal Navy until the 1882. For you, the academic debate is irrelevant. The sight of the flogging is a visceral lesson. It teaches you to keep your head down, to do your job, to never, ever cross an officer. The ship's rules are not guidelines, they are absolute law, enforced with blood and pain. But the flogging has another, more subtle effect on the ship's hygiene. The punished men are now walking wounded. They are in pain, unable to work properly, and their raw, weeping backs are another source of infected matter in the crowded living spaces. They become another burden on the ship's limited medical resources. The very act designed to enforce order also creates more sickness and misery, adding to the cycle of filth and disease. You watch as the two sailors are helped down to the sickbay. Their messmates will have to care for them, changing their dressings and sharing their rations. You look at their bloody backs and then at the cat o' nine tails, now being coiled up by the boatswain's mate. You understand now that on this ship, the greatest threat to your body isn't just the invisible germs or the enemy's cannons. It's the very system designed to keep you in line. The weeks bleed into one another, each day a near-perfect copy of the last. The sun rises, you work. You are suspended in a world of blue. The sky above is a vast, empty bowl. The sea below is a vast, churning plain. There is nothing else. No trees, no new faces, no change of scenery. Just the ship and the blue. This profound monotony begins to work on your mind. It's a psychological challenge as great as any physical hardship. The lack of stimulation, the endless repetition of tasks, the confinement to the same small space with the same people, it creates a unique form of mental strain known as the doldrums. Even when the ship is not physically becalmed, your senses are dulled. The constant creaking of the ship, the shouting of commands, the smell of tar and bilge, these things, once so shocking, have faded into the background noise of your existence. Your world has shrunk to the 170 feet of this vessel. The grand purpose of your voyage, war, exploration, trade, feels abstract and distant. Your reality is the splintery texture of the deck, the heft of a rope in your hands, the taste of salt on your lips. This mental fatigue has a direct impact on hygiene and health. When you are mentally worn down, you begin to lose the will to fight the losing battle against filth. What's the point of meticulously cleaning your eating utensils when the food itself is full of weevils? Why bother trying to scrub the dirt from under your fingernails when you know they'll be black with tar again in an hour? A creeping sense of apathy can set in, a resignation to the grime. This condition was sometimes called calenture, a mental breakdown at sea where sailors could become so detached from reality that they might imagine the ocean to be green fields and attempt to walk off the ship. To combat this mental decay, the crew develops its own culture, its own ways of passing the time. Music is a vital escape. A sailor who can play the fiddle or the fife is a treasured member of the community. In the evenings, after the work is done and the grog has been served, men will gather to listen to tunes that remind them of home. Singing is also common, with sea shanties serving the dual purpose of coordinating work and lifting spirits. Storytelling is another crucial pastime. An older sailor with a good memory and a flair for the dramatic can hold his mess, naval battles, or fantastical legends of the sea stories of mermaids, ghost ships, and the kraken. These stories are a vital part of the oral tradition of the sea, passed down from one generation of sailors to the next. Gambling is also rampant, though officially forbidden. Men will wager their meager pay, their next grog ration, or even their clothes on games of cards or dice. These games are a source of excitement and distraction, but they can also lead to bitter disputes and fights, often ending with a trip to the grating to meet the cat o' nine tails. A peculiar and little-known form of shipboard entertainment was amateur theater. On long, tedious blockades, a captain might encourage his crew to put on plays. They would cobble together costumes from old sails and uniforms, build a makeshift stage on the quarterdeck, and perform popular comedies and dramas of the day. Officers and common sailors would act alongside each other, a rare and temporary suspension of the ship's rigid hierarchy. It was a powerful tool for boosting morale and combating the crushing boredom. Historians who study the social life of sailors often debate the nature of this shipboard culture. Was it a form of resistance against the harsh discipline of the Navy, or was it actively encouraged by the officers as a steam valve? A way to keep the men occupied and out of trouble? The truth is likely a bit of both. A smart captain knew that a board crew was a dangerous crew. Allowing, and even participating in, these pastimes was good management. For you, these small moments of distraction are a lifeline. You listen to the fiddler play a lively jig, and for a few minutes, you can almost forget the ache in your back and the itch of the lice. You listen to a story about a battle off the coast of Spain, and you feel a flicker of the pride and purpose that the daily grind has almost extinguished. But the monotony is a powerful beast. You find yourself staring out at the horizon for long stretches, your mind blank. You perform your duties with a mechanical efficiency, your body on autopilot. The days blur. Was that this morning, or yesterday? The lack of new sensory input makes time itself seem to warp and stretch. This psychological pressure cooker affects everyone, from the lowest cabin boy to the captain himself. The captain bears the ultimate burden of isolation, alone with his responsibility. For you, the pressure of the crowd, the pressure of confinement, the pressure of endless, repetitive sameness. It's a quiet, creeping enemy, as dangerous as scurvy or typhus. It attacks, your spirit breaks, your body is sure to follow. You must find a way to keep that small spark of individuality alive in the vast, blue, crushing emptiness. After what feels like an eternity in the blue wilderness, a cry comes from the lookout perched high on the mastland. Ho! The word spread through the ship like wildfire, a jolt of electricity that shakes everyone out of their lethargic routine. Men rush to the side of the ship, straining their eyes to see the faint, dark line on the horizon. It's land, a real, solid place. The sight brings a wave of relief so powerful it's almost dizzying. The ship is not heading home, but to a friendly port, a colonial outpost or an allied harbor, to take on fresh supplies and make repairs. For the crew, this means one thing above all: a brief, glorious respite from the filth and misery of the ship. As the ship sails into the harbor and drops anchor, the work of victualling begins. Huge barges and lighters pull alongside, loaded with the things you have been dreaming of. Casks of fresh water are hoisted aboard to replace the slimy, foul-tasting dregs in your barrels. Sacks of fresh vegetables, like cabbages and onions, and crates of fruit, perhaps oranges or pineapples depending on the location, are brought on deck. The sight and smell of this fresh produce is intoxicating. It's the cure for the scurvy that has been ravaging the crew, and everyone knows it. Live animals are brought aboard to replenish the ship's depleted stock. New pigs, chickens, and perhaps another cow are loaded into the pens, their healthy noises a stark contrast to the weak, sickly state of the animals they are replacing. But the replenishment is not just about food. This is the crew's chance for a real purification, both for themselves and the ship. The captain will likely grant shore leave to a portion of the crew at a time. For you, stepping onto solid ground after months at sea is a strange experience. The land feels unnaturally still, and you find yourself walking with a slight sea leg sway. The first thing you and your mates do is seek out a tavern, a place to spend your meager pay on fresh beer, or rum that doesn't taste of the grog tub, and to eat a hot meal that wasn't boiled in the ship's coppers. Unadulterated pleasure. This is also your first real opportunity for personal hygiene in months. You can find a stream or a well and wash yourself with fresh water, scrubbing away weeks of accumulated grime. You can wash your clothes properly with real soap and let them dry in the sun, free of salt. It's a feeling of renewal so profound it's almost spiritual. While you are on shore, the men who remain on board are engaged in a massive cleaning effort. This is the time for that dreaded, but necessary, task of sweetening the bilge. The hold is cleared and men go down into the stinking darkness to scrape out the layers of solidified filth. The entire ship is aired out. The gun ports and hatches thrown open to let the fresh land breeze blow through the foul lower decks. The bedding, the thin mattresses and blankets from the hammocks is brought up on deck and aired out in the sun, a process called airing bedding. This is done to kill some of the lice in their eggs, and to dry out the perpetually damp fabric. The decks are wholly stoned with extra vigor. The entire vessel undergoes a deep clean, an attempt to hit the reset button on its inevitable decay. A little known fact about these port calls is that they were a prime time for desertion. For a sailor who had been pressed into service and was desperate to escape, the chance to slip away into a foreign city was a powerful temptation. The Navy knew this and security was tight. Marines would patrol the docks, and shore leave was a privilege, not a right. A man caught trying to desert would face the most severe flogging. Historians often study the logistics of these port calls to understand the reach and limitations of 18th century naval power. A warship was only as effective as its supply chain. The ability to maintain a network of friendly ports around the globe, where ships could refit and resupply, was a cornerstone of British naval strategy. The health of the crew depended directly on the frequency and quality of these stops. But the purification is only temporary. The reprieve is short-lived. After a few days, your shore leave is over, and you are herded back onto the ship. It smells better, cleaner. The water tastes pure. The food is fresh, but you know it won't last. The ship has been cleaned, but it hasn't been sterilized. The rats are still hiding in the deep recesses of the hull. The cockroach eggs are still in the cracks. The lice are still clinging to the timbers. You have brought new, fresh supplies on board, but the fundamental environment of the ship remains the same. Within a few weeks of being back at sea, the old problems will begin to creep back. The water will start to taste stale. The fresh vegetables will run out. The familiar smells will return. The brief, golden period of cleanliness and health will fade, a pleasant but distant memory. The ship has been given a new lease on life, but its essential nature, a crowded, damp, and fundamentally unhygienic place, is unchanged. You have not escaped the filth, you have just enjoyed a brief holiday from it. The mood on the ship shifts. The long, monotonous days of open sea sailing are replaced by a new tension, a palpable sense of anticipation. A lookout, perched in his basket high above the deck, is no longer just scanning a weary blue horizon, he is hunting. His cry, when it comes, is different from land ho. It's sharper, more urgent. Sail ho! Instantly, the ship galvanizes. Officers raise spy glasses to their eyes, their faces taut with concentration. Is it a friendly merchantman, a neutral vessel, or is it the enemy? The distant speck on the horizon is the focus of every mind on board. As the strange sail draws closer and is identified as a potential enemy warship, a new kind of activity begins. This is the preparation for battle, a highly choreographed and brutally practical dance of organized chaos. And a key part of this preparation is a specific kind of cleaning. The order rings out clear for action. This is not about holy stoning or scrubbing. This is about stripping the ship down to its bare, lethal essentials. Any and all clutter that could impede the working of the guns is ruthlessly removed. The flimsy wooden partitions that form the officers' cabins on the gun decks are knocked down and carried below to the hold. The sea chests, the mess tables, the sailors' personal belongings, everything is cleared away. The gun deck is transformed from a living space back into its primary from a weapon. The deck is then covered with a layer of sand. This isn't for cleaning, it's to provide a better grip for the sailors' bare feet. In the heat and fury of battle, the decks will become slick with sweat, sea spray, and inevitably blood. The sand is to prevent the gun crews from slipping as they haul on the heavy tackle of the cannons. It's a grimly practical measure, anticipating the carnage to come. Large tubs of water, known as fighting water, are placed along the decks. This water is for the men to drink during the battle, as the work is intensely hot and dehydrating. But it also has another purpose, to be thrown on any fires that might be started by enemy shot or exploding gunpowder. Down below, the surgeon and his mates are preparing their own theater of operations. The cockpit is cleared. The makeshift operating table is set up. The fearsome chest of instruments is opened and laid out, the saws and knives glinting in the lantern light. Buckets of sand are spread on the floor here too, for the same reason as on the gun deck, to absorb the blood that will soon be spilled. It's a chillingly matter-of-fact preparation for maiming and death. This pre-battle cleaning is a perfect metaphor for the ship's entire approach to hygiene. It is functional, not sanitary. Things are made clean not for health, but for efficiency. The goal is not to eliminate germs, but to eliminate obstacles. The sand on the deck might cover up some dirt, but its purpose is traction. The removal of the cabins might improve airflow, but its purpose is to create a clear field of fire. A little known but vital part of this preparation was the handling of gunpowder. The ship's magazine, located deep in the hold, was a place of extreme caution. Men working in the magazine had to wear special clothes and shoes with no metal nails to prevent any accidental spark. The gunpowder was brought up to the guns in leather or canvas cartridges by powder monkeys, who were usually the youngest boys on the ship. Their job was to run back and forth from the magazine to the guns, a terrifying task for a child. Any spilled powder was immediately wetted down. An explosion in the magazine would destroy the ship instantly. The historical debate around battle preparations often focuses on the psychological aspect. How did these men, facing the prospect of a horrific death, go about these tasks with such focus and professionalism? The answer lies in training and routine. Every man had a specific station and a specific job. The gun captain, the loaders, the spongeress, the powder monkeys, each was a cog in the machine of their gun crew. Practiced routine of clearing for action helped to focus the mind and keep fear at bay. They were too busy to be terrified. As the enemy ship draws nearer, the sounds of preparation are replaced by an eerie quiet. The men stand at their guns, stripped to the waist, their muscles tense. The only sounds are the creak of the ship's timbers, the flap of the sails, and the quiet, clipped commands of the officers. You are part of a gun crew, standing by your massive 32-pounder cannon. You can see the enemy ship clearly now, a mirror image of your own, also cleared for action. Her gun ports open like angry mouths. You look around at the clean deck. The sand under your feet feels gritty and strange. The absence of the familiar clutter of daily life makes the space feel vast and alien. This is the ship in its purest, most deadly form. The veneer of civilization, the cabins, the personal items, the routines of eating and sleeping has been stripped away. All that is left is the wood, the iron, and the men waiting for the first command to fire. The next stage of your journey will not be about fighting filth, but about surviving the firestorm. The command you've been waiting for, the one that ends the terrifying silence, finally comes. It's not a shout, but a clear, carrying order from the captain on the quarterdeck, relayed down the line by his lieutenants. On the uproll, fire. The world dissolves into a hurricane of sound and violence. The gun captain on your crew yanks the lanyard, and the cannon erupts. A massive tongue of orange flame and thick, acrid smoke blasts from the gun port. The can unleaps backwards, a 4-ton beast recoiling with such force that the entire ship shudders. The noise is indescribable, a physical blow that hits you in the chest and rattles your teeth. It's not just loud, it's a concussion that you feel in your bones. Before you can even process it, your training takes over. The gun crew, a symphony of frantic, coordinated motion, springs into action. The bore is sponged out with a wet rammer to extinguish any lingering sparks. A new cartridge of powder and a heavy iron cannonball are rammed home. The gun is hauled forward into position, using heavy block and tackle, the rope straining, the men grunting and heaving. The gun captain adjusts the aim, and the whole violent process repeats. The gun deck is a vision of hell. The space is choked with thick, sulfurous smoke that stings your eyes and rasps in your throat. Visibility drops to a few feet. The only light comes from the flashes of your own cannons and the terrifying bursts of orange from the enemy's guns. The noise is a continuous, deafening roar, a relentless barrage of thunder that makes coherent thought impossible. Orders are screamed into ears, communicated through hand signals and pure instinct. Then comes the enemy's reply. You hear a sound like a giant tearing a sheet of canvas, the scream of incoming cannonballs. An instant later, the ship's hull is struck. The impact is a jarring, splintering crash. A cannonball tears through the wooden side of the ship as if it were paper, sending a lethal spray of thousands of wooden splinters langway across the deck. These splinters are more dangerous than the ball itself, causing horrific, jagged wounds. A man in the crew next to yours cries out, a sharp, terrible sound, and falls to the deck, his arm a mangled ruin. There's no time to help him. Two of his messmates, their faces grim and smeared with gunpowder, drag him out of the way of the gun's recoil and shove him towards the ladder leading down to the cockpit. The gun crew, now one man short, carries on with their work, a seamless, brutal efficiency born of desperation. The fight for cleanliness and the fight against the enemy have now merged in the most gruesome way. The sand on the deck is already doing its job, soaking up the blood that is beginning to pool. The neat, orderly ship you prepared for action is now a scene of chaos and destruction. Splintered wood litters the deck. The air is thick with the smell of gunpowder, sweat, and blood. The role of hygiene, or the lack of it, plays a subtle but deadly part in this carnage. A man's chances of surviving a wound depend heavily on his overall health before the battle. A sailor already weakened by scurvy or other chronic illnesses is far less likely to withstand the shock of a serious injury. His body simply doesn't have the resources to cope. A little-known aspect of naval combat is the sheer variety of ammunition used. It wasn't just solid round shot. There was chain shot to smaller cannonballs linked by a chain designed to rip through sails and rigging. There was grape shot, a canvas bag filled with small iron balls which turned the cannon into a giant shotgun, devastating against enemy crew clustered on the deck. Each type of shot created its own unique brand of horror and injury. The historical debate here often touches upon the experience of the common sailor in battle. Was he a patriotic hero, fighting for king and country, or was he a terrified victim, trapped in a wooden box, fighting for his own survival? The truth, recorded in the few surviving lower deck journals, is that he was both. There was immense pride in serving on a taut ship and beating the enemy. But the primary emotion in the heat of battle was a mixture of adrenaline-fueled focus and stark, animal terror. You don't have time to think about patriotism when a cannonball has just taken the head off the man standing next to you. You focus on your job. You load, you fire, you survive. You are deafened, blinded by smoke, your muscles screaming from the effort of working the gun. Your throat is raw. You see another man go down, clutching his chest. He is dragged away, joining the growing stream of wounded being taken below. The ship is a living thing, and it is being wounded, groaning and shuddering with each impact. And you are a part of it, trapped in its belly, surrounded by the flash of fire, the roar of iron, and the cries of the injured. The surgeon in his cockpit below is about to get very, very busy. You follow the stream of wounded, not as a casualty, but as a helper. A petty officer grabs you and two other men. You help the surgeon. Your gun has been disabled, its carriage smashed by an enemy shot. You are now part of the grim procession heading down into the ship's inferno. The transition from the gun deck to the cockpit is a descent into a different kind of hell. The thunder of the cannons is slightly muffled here, but it's replaced by a more intimate, human horror. The air is thick, hot, and heavy with the smell of blood, sweat, and fear. The dim, swaying lanterns cast long, grotesque shadows on the walls, making the scene flicker like a nightmare. This is the surgeon's kingdom. He stands at his makeshift table, stripped to his shirt sleeves, his arms and apron drenched in blood. His face is a mask of intense concentration, his movements quick and decisive. He is no longer the weary, detached man you saw on deck. He is a whirlwind of focused energy, the only point of calm in a storm of agony. Wounded men are everywhere. They lie on the deck, propped against sea chests, their groans and cries forming a terrible chorus. The surgeon's mates move among them, performing a brutal triage, sorting the hopelessly wounded from those who might be saved. They give swigs of rum to those waiting, a small mercy that does little to numb the pain. The floor is slippery with blood. The sand scattered earlier now a dark, gory paste. Your job is simple and horrific. You are to help hold men down on the table. The first man you are assigned to is a Marine, his leg shattered below the knee by a piece of shrapnel. His face is pale, his teeth gritted. The surgeon takes one look. It has to come off, he says, his voice flat. He hands the man a leather strap to bite on. Bite down hard, son. You take the man's shoulder, your shipmates grabbing his other limbs. The surgeon selects a long, gleaming knife. There is no hesitation. He makes a swift, deep cut through the skin and muscle, then another. The Marine screams, a muffled, guttural sound that is swallowed by the din of the battle above. The surgeon works with incredible speed, pulling the flesh back, and then he reaches for the saw. The sound of the saw on bone is something you will never forget. It's a wet, grating noise, horribly efficient. It takes only a few moments. The severed leg is dropped into a bucket with a sickening thud. The surgeon immediately moves to tie off the arteries, his fingers working nimbly. Then he takes a hot iron from a small brazier and sears the stump closed. The smell of burning flesh fills the air, and the Marine faints from the pain. Next, the surgeon calls, wiping his bloody hands on his apron and reaching for his tools again. There is no time for recovery, no time for sympathy. There is only the next body, the next wound. The cockpit represents the absolute nadir of hygiene on the ship. It is a chamber of horrors where every principle of sanitation is violated. The surgeon moves from man to man, his unsterilized instruments carrying the germs of one wound to the next. The blood of dozens of men mixes on the floor, on his hands on the table. The foul air is thick with the potential for infection. A man who survives the surgeon's knife still has to survive the cockpit's filth. A bizarre and little-known detail from this scene is the use of the ship's boys, as well as holding lanterns and running messages. The younger boys were sometimes tasked with collecting the amputated limbs and throwing them overboard. It was a horrifying job for a child, a brutal initiation into the true nature of naval warfare. Historians who study 18th century surgery often marvel at the sheer resilience of the human body. How did anyone survive these procedures? The answer is that many didn't. The mortality rate from post-operative infections was terrifyingly high. But some did survive, a testament to their own constitution and the grim skill of the surgeons. The debate continues about the surgeons themselves. Were they butchers or lifesavers? The reality of the cockpits suggests they had to be both. They performed brutal, life-altering procedures in the most horrific conditions imaginable, all in a desperate attempt to cheat death. You work in a daze, moving from one screaming man to the next. You hold down a sailor while the surgeon digs a musket ball out of his shoulder. You help another whose arm has been laid open to the bone by a splinter. You become numb to the screams, the blood, the smell. You are a machine, a pair of hands. You see things that will haunt your sleep for the rest of your life. You see the desperate hope in a man's eyes turn to agony, and then to a blessed emptiness as he passes out. You see the surgeon, a godlike figure in this underworld, working without pause, his face a grim to blow a blood and sweat. This is the true price of naval glory. It's not paid in gold or territory, it's paid here, in this dark, bloody room, in screams and severed limbs. As slowly as it began, the thunder subsides. The roaring of the cannons becomes sporadic, then stops altogether. A strange, ringing silence descends upon the ship, broken only by the creaking of damaged timbers and the groans of the wounded. The battle is over. Your ship, battered but victorious, is still afloat. The enemy vessel, the dismasted wreck, has surrendered, but for you and the rest of the crew, the work is far from finished. The aftermath of a battle is in some ways as challenging as the fight itself. Now begins the monumental task of cleaning up, not just the physical wreckage, but the human cost. You emerge from the hell of the cockpit back onto the gun deck. The scene is one of utter devastation. The deck is a chaotic landscape of splintered wood, tangled ropes, and dismounted cannons. The air is still thick with the last wisps of gunpowder smoke, but now it mixes with the coppery smell of cooled blood. The sand on the deck is patchy and dark red in places. The first priority is to tend to the rest of the wounded. Men with less critical injuries who had been told to wait are now being gathered and taken down to the overwhelmed surgeon. The dead are also collected. This is a grim, solemn task. Your shipmates, men you ate with and worked alongside just hours ago, are now lifeless forms, covered with a spare piece of canvas. They are carried to a clear spot on the deck, their faces peaceful in a way that seems unnatural amidst the chaos. They will be sewn into their own hammocks with a cannonball at their feet for a burial at sea. Then the physical cleaning begins. It's a reversal of the clear for action procedure, but infinitely more grim. The decks are scraped and scrubbed, not with holy stones, but with heavy brushes and buckets of seawater, trying to wash away the blood and the grime of battle. The sand, now a gory mud, is swept up and thrown overboard. The ship's carpenters, who were busy during the fight plugging holes in the hull just above the water line, now begin the massive job of patching up the rest of the damage. Their hammers and saws create a new kind of noise, a sound of rebuilding that slowly replaces the silence of the aftermath. The battle has created a fresh and acute hygiene crisis. The ship is now crowded with dozens of new patients, many with open, suppurating wounds. The sick bay, already a foul place, is now dangerously overcrowded. The risk of infection, the dreaded hospital fever, a catch-all term for infections like gangrene and sepsis, is now higher than ever. The surgeon, exhausted from hours of non-stop surgery, must now begin the long, slow process of post-operative care, changing dressings and monitoring for the first signs of infection. A battle he is ill-equipped to win. A little-known challenge in the aftermath of a battle was dealing with prisoners. If the enemy ship had surrendered, a prize crew would be sent over to take command, and a contingent of prisoners would be brought back to your ship. These men, often wounded themselves, added to the overcrowding and the strain on food, water, and medical supplies. They also brought their own lice and diseases with them, introducing a new cocktail of potential illnesses into your ship's already fragile ecosystem. Historians studying the human cost of these battles often look at the ship's log and the surgeon's journal. The log will list the dead and wounded with stark brevity. The surgeon's journal provides a more detailed, and often more horrifying, account of the injuries he treated. These documents, when they survive, are a powerful testament to the brutality of naval warfare. The debate often circles back to the concept of acceptable losses. How many casualties were considered a good outcome for a victory? The cold arithmetic of 18th century warfare can be shocking to modern sensibilities. For you, the work is heavy and your heart is heavier. You helped to scrub a dark stain from the deck, knowing it was where your friend from another mess had fallen. You help to coil a rope, your hand sticky with a substance you try not to think about. The elation of victory, the cheering that briefly erupted when the enemy's flag came down, has faded. It's been replaced by a deep, weary sorrow. The ship is a wounded beast, and its crew is tending to its injuries. The physical scars on the hull will be patched up. But the other scars, the empty spaces in the hammocks, the men now missing limbs, the memories of the cockpit will remain. The ship has been cleaned of the immediate signs of battle, but it is now dirtier than ever in a much more profound way. It is saturated with death and pain. And as you try to restore some semblance of order to the wreckage, you know that this vessel, and you, will never be truly clean again. The voyage home is not a celebration. It is a long, slow exhalation. The news has spread through the fleet, a treaty has been signed. The war is over. Your ship, its duty done, has been ordered back to England. You are going home. But the ship is a wounded veteran, scarred and weary. Her sails are a patchwork of repairs, her hull is battered, and she creaks and groans with a fatigue that mirrors your own. The journey is different from the outward voyage. The tension is gone, replaced by a quiet, bone-deep exhaustion. The routines continue: the watches, the trimming of sails, the daily rations, but they are performed with the listless air of an ending. There is no more clearing for action, no more cannon drills. The gun deck remains a living space, cluttered with the hammocks and sea chests of the survivors. The ship is still a floating island of filth. The Victory has not vanquished the smells, the lice, or the diseases. The sick bay is still full of men recovering from battle wounds, their dressings a constant source of foulness. Scurvy, which had been held at bay by the last port call, begins to creep back as the final stores of fresh vegetables dwindle. The ship is a microcosm of the war itself, victorious, but ravaged. You spend your time looking west towards home. You talk with your messmates about what you'll do with your pay. You'll buy new clothes, real leather shoes. You'll eat a steak, a whole one, with fresh bread and butter. You'll sleep in a real bed, one that docent's way, for a whole night. These are small, simple dreams, but they are the anchors that keep your mind from drifting away on the tide of memory. After weeks that feel like years, you finally see it. The green, gentle coastline of England. It's so different from the harsh, tropical lands you've seen. It's soft, familiar. It's home. As the ship navigates the final channel into a great naval port like Portsmouth or Spithead, you line the rails with the other men, a silent, gaunt crowd in shabby clothes. The process of leaving the Navy is not as simple as walking down a gangplank. The ship is decommissioned. The stores are unloaded. The cannons are removed. The ship is stripped down until it is a hollow, silent hulk. Then the crew is paid off. You wait for days, sometimes weeks, living on the ship in the harbor, for the paymaster to arrive with the heavy chests of coins, your pay, a combination of your meager wages of any prize money from captured enemy ships, is counted out. For some, after years at sea, it's a small fortune. But here, at the very end, the Navy often had one last cruel trick to play. A little-known and deeply cynical practice was for press gangs to wait at the docks where sailors were being paid off. A man, his pockets full of money from a 3-year voyage, could step onto the shore, take 10 steps towards a tavern, and be pressed by a gang looking for experienced seamen to man a ship just beginning its own commission. His freedom would last mere minutes. It was the ultimate betrayal. Historians today continue to explore the long-term consequences of this life on the men who survived it. What was the psychological toll of years of confinement, brutality, and terror? The term post-traumatic stress disorder didn't exist, but sailors' memoirs and court records from the period are filled with accounts of men who could never readjust to life on land. They were haunted by nightmares, prone to alcoholism and violence, unable to settle down. They had been shaped by the sea, by the ship's filth and the Navy's discipline, and the land had become a foreign country to them. Did the rhythms of the ship, the rocking, the routine, the constant threat ever truly leave them? It's a question that academia still grapples with, trying to give voice to the silent suffering of these men. For you, the moment finally comes. Your name is called. You receive your pay, a small leather bag heavy with coin. You walk across the deck, your feet so accustomed to the feel of wood, and you step onto the gangplank. You take a final look back at the ship. It's not the glorious vessel of paintings. It's a dirty, scarred, floating box that has been your world. It was your prison, your workplace, your hospital, and the thing that, against all odds, kept you alive. You step onto the solid, unmoving cobblestones of the dock. The feeling is so strange it makes you dizzy. You take a deep breath. The air doesn't smell of tar and bilge and sickness. It smells of coal smoke, damp earth, and baking bread from a nearby shop. It's the smell of the land, the smell of being free. Your voyage is over. The sounds of the port city begin to fade now. the clatter of carts on cobblestone and the shouts of the vendors softening into a distant murmur. The sailor you were, standing on the solid ground, begins to feel like a memory from a dream you are just starting to leave behind. The sharp edges of that wooden world are smoothing over. The grit of the sand on the deck, the sting of the salt spray, the chill of the damp, it all dissolves into a gentle, rhythmic sensation. The violent rocking of the storm and the jarring recoil of the cannons have eased into a slow, deep, predictable sway, like a cradle being pushed by a steady hand. You can feel your own bed holding you now, as the hammock once did, a safe cocoon in the vast darkness. Let the creaking timbers of the ship melt into the quiet, familiar sounds of your own home settling in the night. That low hum of the wind in the rigging can become the soft whir of a fan, or the sound of your own quiet breathing. The endless, deep blue of the ocean at midnight has been replaced by the comforting darkness of your room. There are no more watches to stand, no more calls to action. The long voyage is done. All that is left is to let the gentle tide of sleep pull you away from the shore of Wakefulness. Just drift. Let the current take you into the deep, quiet, peaceful waters of your own dreams. There is only rest now. The end of the article. Good night.